thought this was Charlie's place. Mary, how can you get to the different pages, you think? You gotta go through all of them? Sure. Not legally. I guess if the property owner
Just
asked.
walk in instead of...
Henry?
Then you gotta go up, you gotta go down with it.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's 7 o'clock, and as mayor, I hereby call to order the regularly scheduled meeting of Laconia City Council for Monday, August 14th, 2017. As always, we will begin our meeting tonight with a salute to our country and our American flag, and I'd ask that you please stand and join Councilor Henry Lippman in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. For the record, I'll note that the minutes to tonight's meeting are being kept by City Clerk Mary Reynolds, and I would ask that she please call the roll.
Councilor Doyle?
Here.
Councilor Bounds?
Here.
Councilor Littman?
Here.
Councilor Baird?
Present.
Councilor Hamel?
Here.
Councilor Baldick?
Here.
Presiding Mayor Edward England.
I think present needs company tonight, so I'm going to clear myself present. Thank you. Let the record show that all 6 councilors are in attendance tonight and that a quorum for this meeting has been established. Also, let the record show that the council is joined at the front table tonight by City Manager Scott Myers and by the City Finance Administrator Donna Woodeman. We have 2 presentations tonight to start out with. We have 2 special guests with us. First off, I would like to recognize the Executive Director of the New Hampshire Retirement System, George Lagos. Mr. Lagos, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council and staff, thanks so much for the opportunity to appear here tonight. I'll try to keep this to about 15 minutes or so, and I'm happy to take questions as we go along. I hope you all have my prior mailing here in front of you. There are a couple things that I'd like to refer to here as we go through the time. First, on the front page, the objectives that we talk about. Primary reason to be here is to update you on what's going on at the retirement system. And what's driving this is I've been at the retirement system now for about 5 years, and we really haven't had an active employer outreach effort until this point in time. And over the last rate cycle, there was a lot of press, and obviously the impact of employer rates is important to all communities, schools, employers, small and large cities alike, and it's a very important issue. So we thought we'd try to do a little bit better about getting out and giving you the direct message to make sure if you have any questions we answer them, and to give you a face and a name to contact if there anything comes up along the way that might be helpful for you to have a conversation with us about. One thing I'll just mention to you as a footnote is that in one of my prior lives I was the chair of the Bow Budget Committee for 3 years, on the committee for 4. So I think I can fairly say to you that I do have a perspective of what it's like to be on the other side of the issue when it comes to having to pay the employer contribution rates for public employees. It's a very important and impactful issue. So what I'm going to talk about tonight are assets and investment performance, the unfunded liability, contribution rates, the decennial commission just briefly, operational issues, and then obviously I'm happy to take any feedback you have now or later. So if you look on the back side of the page that was appended to the front of your book, there was a clip to the front was this memo that looks like this with the agenda on it, and on the back side you should see some graphs and figures, and I'm just going to run through those. Yes, sir. So it looks like this. Okay. So first, assets. You can see at the top the chart with the green bar going across. As of the end of the last fiscal year, we were at $7.46 billion in assets. This year, fortunately, we had a very good year from an investment standpoint. Our fiscal year runs from 7/1 to 6/30. This year, we haven't finalized the numbers, but the investment returns for this year look like they're going to come in at about 12.7, and rounded up for some alternatives, probably 13%. So what that means is we had growth in our overall assets from 7.46 to 8.178 billion as of the end of the fiscal year. So very dramatic increase, and I want to mention that's after we paid all of the benefits that we paid during the course of the year. So we had over $700 million in benefits paid, but still our assets grew by over $700 million. So that was obviously a very good year. The next, investment performance. The numbers here you can see are for various periods of time. We emphasize always that we're not focused on the 12-month period, but obviously it's better to be in double digits than not. But what's really important is our investment performance over time. Our assumed rate of return, our target rate is 7.25%. That's what the actuaries use to develop our rates. So if we do better than 7.25, that's obviously a good thing, and when we don't do as well, that's less helpful. In terms of, just to bridge this conversation to employer rates, I just want to mention that we don't adjust employer rates year by year based on investment returns, because if we did, you'd be all over the map. You can see so they're smooth. So every year we take 20% of the last 5 years and we average it out. So what that means is we don't get the full benefit this year. If our investment returns end up being 13%, which is what we expect, we don't take all that full benefit in 1 year. We take 20% of it, and we average it with 20% from the prior 4 years. However, there is a bit of good news nonetheless, because when we look back over the past 5 years, we're dropping off 2012, which was a year where we earned 0.9%. And we're replacing that with a year where we earned 13%. So that's going to be very good. Where we'll see that translate is in terms of the setting of the next cycle of contribution rates for 2020 and 2021. Funded ratio. As you all know, I suspect you all know, the retirement system has a substantial unfunded liability. We're funded at the rate of about 60% right now. It's about a $5.1 billion deficit. So it's a very dramatic deficit. What I want to tell you is that that is not going to improve in the next 3 to 5 years, not materially. It may nudge up, but the way the amortization schedule is set, we're now 8 years into a 30-year amortization schedule. So in terms of setting expectations, although we're going to have a great year from an investment return standpoint, 13%, that is not going to materially change our unfunded liability. It might creep up a little bit, but it won't be like a 5-point jump. Based on the amortization schedule, our expectation is by 2026 is when we should exceed the 70% threshold. And 2031 is when we should exceed 80%. So I think it's important to set that expectation, because naturally everybody's anxious to see the unfunded liability improve and our funded ratio improve, and that's supposed to happen over a 30-year time period. But like the front end of any amortization schedule, the principal pay down isn't going to happen on the front end. So we're going to see that happen over time, but we don't expect a short-term improvement. Question?
Can you talk about how this all connects to the rate of increase that, like, I think this year's budget was around 300,000 on the city side and about 300,000 on the school side, rough numbers.
Yes.
In terms of the increase over the prior 2-year period. I think that's honestly, our chief concern is
Right.
how's that growth going to change over the next, say, to 2026.
Right.
You know, the funded liability, you know, in terms of your statements here, and, you know, that isn't an immediate concern of ours. Our immediate concern really is, you know, every 2 years, what's the rate of growth going to be in that pension cost?
I certainly appreciate that, and all what I just told you was the foundation for talking about rates, which is what I'm going to talk about next. So,
Before you, if you're going to do that, I do have a question on the liability
sure.
side. So in terms of when you use the term NPL and UAL,
Yes.
And let me see if I can simplify this question. So is it the accumulated benefits of people to a point in time, or is that forecasted out in the future? I guess I'm trying to get a sense of what measure we're really
Yes.
looking at here. I understand the difference between the the two in the sense that one is based on a smoothing and one is based on mark-to-market.
So for purposes of this conversation, I'm going to say disregard NPL. Net pension liability is a GASB financial reporting requirement. It does change year to year, but it's not what's used in developing the rates. So it's an important number, but it moves with our investment returns. It doesn't use that 5-year smoothing. So for purposes of rate determination, I'd say just put that to the side. The UAAL is what's important, the unfunded actuarially accrued liability. That's what the actuaries use to develop the contribution rates.
And is that a measure of the benefits earned to date, or is that the benefits that are due in the future
Right.
from?
So I'll give you a quick answer, but I'm going to go into it a little bit more detail. The actuarially accrued unfunded liability relates to benefits that were already earned but not paid for. Okay? So in the rate setting, there's a component that goes to funding the UAL, which is basically to pay for prior debts incurred. Okay? It's already incurred. My simple analogy is the hole, it's got to be filled. The rest of the contribution rate is based on the normal cost, which is the actual prospective cost of benefits not yet earned but to be earned. Okay? Right now, because of the unfunded liability, your contribution rate, actually 80% of the contribution rate for employers is attributable to the unfunded liability. The actual cost of the benefit itself is 20% of the total contribution rate. So it's a very material issue. As that unfunded goes down over time, that's going to give some rate relief as we go out over time. I'm going to refer to a document that's going to walk through that, and I think that'll give you a little bit more of an explanation, but that's the high level. Okay? So in terms of contribution rates, of the last exhibit, the last chart on the bottom of that page, just to summarize, that shows you that the contribution rates for the employer, by the way, I think you all know the actual member rate for the actual teacher, the firefighter, the police officer, or the city employee or town employee is statutory. They pay a fixed rate no matter what happens with the unfunded. The balance of the cost of the benefit is paid by the employer, and that's what moves. That's a variable rate based on the actuarial assumptions and how we actually perform. Okay, so this shows you what the rates have been over the past 3 rate cycles by category, and as you can see, the rates vary by group. Overall, the average increase in rates from the 2018-19 period as compared to 16-17 was a 7% increase in the aggregate, but it all depends on what your mix of employees are in terms of how many firefighters, how many police, how many teachers do you have versus other employees. To the extent that those numbers move around, your rate impact would have varied accordingly. Okay? Yes.
So if, just in terms of the 7% increase, so 2 years from today, something in the range of something up to 7% to, can you give us some sense of that?
You just got to wait for me. I'll get
Okay.
there.
Thank you.
So I want to refer you, there are a number of attachments enclosed in this book, and I'm not going to go through them all, but they're on the front of this page. I listed everything that's in the sleeves, and I'll just mention quickly, on the left side, these NYKs are called Now You Knows. They're simple description, I shouldn't say simple, they're not detailed descriptions of complex subjects that are meant to be easy to read. And I want to refer to one as we're talking right now. The third one in there, I think, is employer contribution rates. And this is, I think, going to answer all the questions you've been asking, except for the predicting the future, which I'll do separately. Okay? So the main reason contribution rates went up the last time wasn't really the performance of the system over the 2-year period. It was a unique thing because every 5 years, all of the assumptions are reviewed. Okay? It's called an experience study, and what the actuary does is say, okay, over the past 5 years, how did we do comparing what we thought our investment returns were going to be, what we thought the payroll growth was going to be, how many more people were going to be added in the employment roles, and also the mortality rates. And those 3 things showed that the performance wasn't up to the assumption. So we reduced the investment returns from 7.75 to 7.25. Okay? We reduced the payroll growth factor from 3.75 to 3.25, and the mortality tables were changed to reflect the fact that people are living longer, which is a wonderful thing except for contribution rates. Okay? Those 3 things increased the unfunded liability, and that resulted in the change in rates. Had we not done an experience study, the rates wouldn't have gone up. So it would have been, that's where we would have been. But we have to do the experience study because there's no sense in pretending you're doing better than you are. Okay? So that was the reason they went up last time. Now, what happens next? Okay? The next time we're going to set rates is going to be in September of the next year. Okay? So September 2018, we'll set the rates. The actuary is going to come back between now and then and give us an analysis of how we did in the past 12 months, what was our performance against the actuarial assumptions. And we already know we've got a leg up because we beat the 7.25 on the investment side. So what that means is a lot of the other assumptions would have to go horribly wrong to offset that. So without predicting the future, which I'm not able to do, I would say that the dynamics are entirely different in terms of what you're likely to see in terms of rate activity. I think we should have a fairly stable rate scenario over the next 2 years. I think it's fair to say. I'd be shocked if that were not the case. But I hesitate to, create an impression out there that I can tell you definitively. But I think that's what we'll see, because we're dropping off that bad year, 2012, picking up a good year. And the most important assumption of them all is how you do on the investment front. Okay? Yes.
Go ahead.
When you say we did better by doing 13% over the 7.25,
Yes.
what are you doing with that balance? Are you paying down more, or where are you depositing that extra?
Well, it's not really extra because we have a huge unfunded liability. It's more what really happens is it goes into the actuarial analysis where they look at what's the liability look like, what's the asset look like, and what's the unfunded portion of the asset, and that determines what the rate is. So if you do better than the assumption, there's less unfunded liability, and if there's less unfunded liability, the contribution rate doesn't go up. It's likely to either stay flat or come down, depending on the other assumptions.
So you're using the extra money to pay down the unfunded balance?
If you want to call it extra, yeah, it would be, that would in fact end up reducing the unfunded liability. That's correct. Okay?
Counselor, did you have a question?
Are there any federal or IRS standards that are propping up the position of the pension plan that are going to be wearing away or anything like that?
No.
Okay.
No. And I'll tell you, I've been at this for I was in the financial services business for 30 years before I came over here, and I'll tell you the most important thing here is having the regulatory and administrative structure in place that supports assuring that the plan is properly funded. The analogy, you hear about states like Illinois and New Jersey, to name Connecticut, that have very big unfunded liability positions. And the simple analogy is that, when you have a hole, you have a couple of options, right? You can either keep digging, stop digging, or fill it in, all right? So in New Hampshire, because of the way the law works, our Board of Trustees is legally responsible for making sure the rates are set appropriately to raise the contributions necessary to pay for the benefit and to pay the unfunded. Without that, what happens is you keep digging the hole. So the unfunded gets bigger, and eventually it becomes unsustainable. So because we have that infrastructure, we're actually filling the hole in. Now, I told you that the timetable is, we're not filling it in this week, we're filling it in over the next 22 years. But there's a timetable in place. I don't see any regulatory or administrative body changing anything. The asterisk there would be the state legislature is the plan sponsor, so they get to make the rules. If they decide something changes, then it changes. But our job there is to make sure that they make good decisions. Yes.
Go ahead. I'll follow.
On the matter, just for the public's benefit in particular, at one point the state was contributing about, was it 40% of
Yes.
the annual amount, and then I think it was 2014 or so
Before that.
They pulled away all funding, so it's now on the municipalities 100%. From your standpoint, do you have any insight as to, or do you, as an organization, are you allowed to lobby anything with respect to that? Give us some perspective on
Yeah.
that.
Well, I know, I can tell you what my perspective was when I was on the Budget Committee, and they kept reducing it, and in my current role, I have to say that, that really is a policy matter for the state to decide to what extent they're willing to subsidize the employer rate. And at one point, it was 40, and as you know, they knocked it down to 35, then down to 30, then to 25, and it was supposed to jump back up to 35, and instead they contributed, they changed the law in 2011 with HB 2. They contributed $3.5 million to the employer's share, the municipality's share, and they stopped paying the 25% contribution, and it went away, and it all came back to your shoulders. There was a lawsuit, as you know, City of Concord sued, the Supreme Court said it wasn't an unfunded mandate, and there goes the money. The legislature this past session considered a bill, legislation to reinstate some portion of it. We were involved in conversations with some key folks down there on the subject, and at the end of the day, they decided not to go forward with that legislation, and instead, I think they offered some sort of funding to the municipalities through another vehicle. And as you know, the Municipal Association has been very active in monitoring this, and they'd be better to tell you what the dollar amount was. I just know that this piece of legislation that would have reinstated that didn't happen. It's something I think they're hearing it more and more now. I think they're paying more attention to it this legislative session than I'd seen them do before, but I wouldn't want to venture a guess if they're going to ever reinstate any portion of it.
Councilor Bear?
You said that the employees' rates are fixed.
Yes.
And they can't be changed. However, I believe there has been a lawsuit that the New Hampshire Supreme Court has said they could raise the contributions by the employees.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry.
Is that in the United States Supreme Court now?
No, if I said that, I misspoke. What I meant to say was that the employee portion of the contribution rate is fixed in the statute. What happened was there was a lawsuit that was taken to the Supreme Court, an appeal to the Supreme Court, by the employees, the unions primarily, saying, you can't change our contribution rates as a contractual right. And the Supreme Court did not agree with that, and they took the position that it was something that could be changed because there was no, it's called the unmistakability doctrine. They adopted the unmistakability doctrine, which says that unless there's evidence in the statute that the legislature intended that that never be changed, and that's evidence there, then the court can in fact change it. So they did raise it. So as the plan sponsor, the legislature could again decide at some point in time in the future to change that contribution rate.
But it has to be changed by legislation.
By legislation only, right, as opposed to the other rate which floats, right. So I think I'm just about through my time here in terms of what I agreed to take up of your valuable time. But I do want to mention on this, if you look at this 5 facts on employer contributions, just on the back side, the graph that has the contribution rates, that's the one thing I just want to bring your attention to. It shows a couple of things. It shows the different groups and the different rates for the different groups. And this refers to the employer portion of the rate only. But if you look at, let's just look at employee P sub, which is political sub, which would be your employees here in Laconia. The actual normal cost for their benefit, the cost of their actual pension benefit to you as the employer is only really 2.16%. On top of that, there's 8.92% of UAAL, which is paying the prior debt, the unfunded liability. That's the benefits that were accrued prior in time that were not paid for. So it's like a mortgage on the first house, and we're now in the second house, but we still have to pay both mortgages. Then across, you can see as a percent, 80.5%.
Meaning that the system borrowed the money to meet those obligations?
Well, no, actually what happened was the legislature changed the actuarial methodology for measuring the performance of the system, okay? And they did that over about an 18-year period. So basically, the simple way to describe it was they kept score improperly. So instead of being fully funded or reasonably funded over a period of time, which is what they thought they were, and basing the contribution rates on that, they were wrong. The actuarial methodology they used overstated the actual status, the health of the pension system. So everybody was paying what they were told to pay, but the problem was they were told to pay X percent of a bill that was really Y percent. So they underfunded it. And when that came to light, they enacted a statute to say, no, we can't use that methodology any longer. We need to change the methodology. And when they did that, that revealed the size of the unfunded liability. That's the majority of it. There are a couple of other things, but I won't. You'll see them. They're articulated in this memo rather than me go into them. But that's the majority of the unfunded liability.
But there's no note payable.
No, there's no note. There's no hard note. No.
Okay.
No.
So as you complete the filling the bucket or the whole period, it would go back to more pension normal costs some decades from now.
Right. It's over a long timetable, as I say. It's not a short term. It's a big problem that was created over a long period of time, and, you know, the obvious way to handle it is you pay off $5.1 billion right now, and you're back to even, and your contribution rates go way down. That, you know, that's not politically feasible in terms of the size of the New Hampshire budget to be done. So it's got to be paid over time, and I think that's what the future holds, is continuing the process we're on.
Counselor Bear?
I just want to state, for the benefit of the audience and the listening audience also, that the city of Laconia this year will be paying $5 million towards the retirement fund. That includes the county, the school, the fire, the police, and the city. And with the new county jail coming into force right now and new people being added to the staff, we're going to increase our number of people that will go on the retirement fund. We should all be aware of this and work or try to persuade our representatives to be a little bit more active in trying to help the cities they represent. And asking for more money from the employees, it's a very small percentage they pay, is not out of the question.
Counselor Hamel?
Just a question on how good do you feel about the statistics that you've used to calculate this 1936 maybe break-even point?
1936.
I mean, I'm sorry, 2036.
Okay. I was hoping I didn't say 1936.
I did.
Yeah. I think they're sound. Historically, I mean, every 5 years, the assumptions are reevaluated and reset. So it's not that we stay put with assumptions that aren't valid. I think the two major factors that I am most concerned about over that time period is what happens with investment returns. I mean, historically, we've done better than 7.25. We've done over 8 over time. And if you look at the most recent 5 years, you know, just fortuitously, we have 3 double-digit years, so we're actually closer to 9 3/4 over the past 5 years against the 7.25. So that's a good thing. That's no guarantee. You know, if we have another 2002 dot-com bubble, or if we have another 2008, 2009, you know, you get into 2 or 3 years of really poor investment returns, that can impact it. Payroll growth, a little bit less so, but, you know, if payrolls don't stabilize or start to grow a little bit, that could have an impact as well. But I think the biggest thing is investment return. We use a lot of analysis and advice from professional investment managers in setting the investment returns. The long-term perspective was in excess of 7.25. It was closer to 7.49. But, you know, that's a crystal ball. Nobody can predict the future, obviously. So, I mean, historically, we've done better than that, and the prognosis is we should do better than that. So I'm reasonably comfortable, but that's the thing I most worry about, because external events can drive what happens in the market. And also, you know, 6/30 of the end of a fiscal year is the date we measure our performance, so luck plays a role in it too. For example, last year we had Brexit, you know, 3 days before the end of the fiscal year, and we lost a couple points just like that, which impacted the investment year. So there are things that keep me awake at night, certainly. The investment returns is the biggest factor.
What kind of risk are you taking to net 13%?
I think very reasonable risk. We've got a very good investment committee. These people all have to have financial investment
Is
experience.
this money invested largely with hedge funds?
No, not at all. There's no hedge funds at all. It's invested 50% in equities, 30% domestic U.S., 20% international equities, 25% fixed income, 15% in alternatives, which is private equity, private debt, and 10% in real estate. That's the target, and we're within 2-3 points of each one of those targets, and it's always rebalanced and managed throughout. So our risk portfolio is very reasonable. We are not chasing risk to get returns, I can assure you.
Thank you. Are you, let me ask him a quick question first. Are you through with your presentation?
I am, sir.
Okay, so we're to general questions now, all right? Counselor Hamel.
On the unfunded balance, wasn't it just, maybe a year and a half ago, it was $4 billion roughly,
Yes,
and now it's over 5.
yes, that's exactly
So
right.
within a year's period, that unfunded balance raised $1 billion.
Right, and
So if you carry that out, what are we looking at? I mean, you really think that by 2036 that you can level that out?
well,
Because, you know, you've had good interest rates for a while, but back in the, the 1980s, 90s, in that area there, I mean, the rates plummeted because of the, you know, the downturn in real estate and all that stuff. I mean, it could happen again, and this could balloon way out of proportion.
I think, you know, that's my answer to your other question. What keeps me awake at night is investment returns holding up. Over time, you know, again, I'll say, though, if you look at our 30-year track record on investment returns, it's been over 8%. So, you know, we have to be mindful. We don't go out with a parade when we hit 13% because it's 1 year. It's a question of what you do over time, the long term. And the long term is proven that we're over 8. Doesn't mean we'll be there tomorrow, and that's the open question. But I think 7.25 is reasonable. I just want to say why it went up. It went up because we adjusted our assumptions. You know, we said 7.75 perhaps is not reasonable coming out of, you know, we've had a lot of accelerated growth in 2008 and 9. You know, the market's come back strong, and a lot of people wonder what's holding it up now. And so coming back a little bit made sense. That created more unfunded liability. That drove up contribution rates.
Did the state, maybe 4 years ago, maybe 5 now, the federal government allowed the companies of pension funds ownership to adjust their pension funds based on, or their, what they have in their pension funds based on a 5% federal interest rate. It was a fake interest rate that they set at 5%, and it could make, it could, huh?
Discount rate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It could make your fund whole at the time, but then over the 5 years, it goes back down to whatever the rate is at present. Did the state do anything with that as far as their pension fund?
No. First of all, public pensions and private pensions are not regulated the same. Private industry pension funds have to use a different discount rate than public. And GASB and FASB are two different accounting mechanisms, so there's none of that. I will say that 7.25, if you look at all the investment returns across the country in public pensions, we're well below the median in terms of our assumed rate of return. So we're being more conservative than most of the public pension systems in the country.
The other question I have is overtime that is allowed to be calculated into the retiree's person's pension fund.
Right.
Is there any discussion on eliminating that and just using the base salary?
Overtime, I believe, no, I don't think there's any discussion on that. I mean, the special duty pay for police and things like that have been addressed prospectively with regard to new entries into the system. And payouts, one of the other issues was payouts at the back end of employment and whether or not those are calculated in. And those rules have changed, and when they changed the law in 2011 and 12, they changed those prospectively. People who are already vested still get that benefit when they retire. People who weren't vested at the time are treated differently under the law now.
Okay.
Okay. They did a lot of changes in 2011 and 12 to the benefit side and the contribution side.
Could you explain quickly for the benefit of the council and our audience, under the New Hampshire controlling law for the New Hampshire retirement system, who determines and how, what benefits will be paid? In other words, how you calculate pensions, et cetera, and health benefits and that sort of thing. Who determines that?
Okay, well, first of all, I just want to take health benefits off the table. Health, we don't administer health benefits. There's a medical subsidy that's paid by employers for the benefit of employees, and we serve as the mechanism for deducting those from the paychecks, from the pension paychecks, and act as the administrator. But we're not in the insurance business at all. That's the employer's realm. So we're just that isn't an issue that I'm going to say we manage or control. In terms of the actual rules, the benefits paid, That's determined by the legislature. So the way it works is the Constitution says that we have an obligation to set the appropriate rates required to fund the plan, and the employers are required to pay them. It also says that the pension system assets can't be touched for any purpose other than for pension benefits, which is very important. And then in terms of the rules of the game, in terms of what benefits people will receive, or how they are calculated, that's all determined by the legislature. And back in 2011 and 12, when HB2 was enacted, they in fact changed a lot of the benefit structure. They increased the amount of time you have to work. They changed the vesting period. You had to work longer to earn the same pension, basically, when they changed those rules.
So those rules are not set by the Board of Trustees?
No, they are not set by the Board of
So
Trustees.
if you're interested in changing them, you have to have the legislature act.
Absolutely. And if I could emphasize, basically, look at it like law enforcement. The law enforcement's responsible for enforcing the laws. They don't decide what the speed limit is, they enforce it. We don't decide what the benefit is, we administer it. So whatever the law says is what we administer. We're not allowed, actually, to use any of our resources to determine or influence policy matters unless it's an administrative matter that affects our ability to administer the plan. And that's primarily the only reason we get involved with a policy matter.
Okay. Counselor Hamel?
Yeah. I think, I'm very concerned about the unfunded amount and what it's going to end up costing the cities and towns in New Hampshire. If it went up $1 billion in 1 year, it's really kind of scary what's going to happen in 30-something years. Because if you're saying that within 8 years you've had this interest rate anyway, and it still went up $1 billion in the unfunded balance, and you project that out with new people coming on, more probably, I know people are going to fall off, but I don't see that hole being filled right away.
Well,
Or, and I know you say it's going to take a long time.
Yeah, I don't think I'm conveying the answer properly, though, because that arose from a 5-year experience study. Okay, that's not, it's impossible for that to, impossible is a difficult word. That's something that won't happen in the ordinary course. If you change your assumptions dramatically, which was what we did, that created that change in the unfunded liability. Right now, and these are assumptions, if all of the assumptions we've made now turn out to be correct, which is in an ideal world, and it's not possible because actuarial assumptions are assumptions and not facts. Some will be higher, some will be lower, you don't know. You'd pay the same contribution rate that you're paying right now all the way through the next 22 years, and the unfunded liability would be zero if the current assumptions are met. Okay? That's the way it's modeled. Will it happen that way? Nobody knows. But, I share your concern. The unfunded liability is a big chunk of money. It's $5 billion, we're at 60%. The good news is there's a mechanism in place to bring it back. A lot of places that have these problems don't have that mechanism, so
Well,
they
the
keep...
mechanism in place is extremely costly for towns and cities, though.
That's
Absolutely,
it.
absolutely, yes, it is.
Well,
I mean,
But
in effect,
the-
we're paying a 30% tax.
You're paying the cost of the unfunded liability, which, frankly, I will say to you, though, was a debt... The problem is the debt was incurred. Now, whose fault was it? I'll leave that to other people, but, because we had in place, from a legislative standpoint, an incorrect actuarial methodology to measure, the unfunded liability was created. So that was money that was not paid when it ought to have been paid, and it's being paid now.
I guess this is a collector question, but if we average out police and fire, we're roughly 30% now, contribution rate. And so you're the collector, in effect, right?
Right.
As you said. All right. So my question is, and you may not have an answer, I don't know, of that 30% ballpark number, do you have any idea how much of that is due to actual pension requirements and how much of that is due to promises made in the healthcare area?
Well, healthcare has nothing to do with it.
Nothing.
Okay. The only thing healthcare has to do with it, if you look on the back of that contribution chart, there's a medical subsidy column. Okay? So the cost of the medical subsidy, which is not a pension benefit, is included in our rate, and it's 4% of the total rate. So that would be the answer to your question. And going, so looking at fire across the bottom of the page, 7% for the actual benefit, 20% for the unfunded, 4% for the medical subsidy cost. The other thing I'll just mention about the medical subsidy, just so you know, is that...
Well,
it's-
that's the answer then.
It's a
You're
phased-out
collecting, of the 31.89, 4% is for health.
for medical subsidy,
Yeah,
right?
that's what I meant.
Right. I'll mention that for police, for Group 2s, there's still some people being added to the medical subsidy benefit, not many, because the law was changed, and for other people, it's no longer available. So the medical subsidy is something that's going to be phased out over time.
Just going back to the concern on the growth and the unfunded liability, you mentioned three things, I think, earlier in your presentation. The change in the investment rate, right?
Right.
Change in the assumptions on mortality, and what was the third one?
Change in the payroll growth factor.
Yeah. So just what you're saying to us, those three factors have been sort of corrected, if you will, based on your 5-year study, and based on the principles you have in place, you think that's more likely in 5 years from now that we're not going to see the type of gap that we saw over this most recent 5-year study. So if we go back to that sort of $1 billion growth, you're saying most of it was related to that change in assumptions, correct?
Yeah, contribution rates would not have gone up. The unfunded liability would not have increased had we not changed the actuarial assumptions.
Right, so it's sort of somewhat similar to the issue that Council Hamel raised of, the artificial discount rates that were being used in the public sector, that we were using some artificial rates for those three factors. I know that in the private sector, the mortality rates, I think, are being updated more frequently. Do you have things in place to monitor the other factors in terms of whether you're staying on top of those? I know investment returns an obvious one.
Oh,
You
yeah.
see it every year.
Yeah, this experience study evaluates every assumption that the actuaries make in determining our rates. And what we do is we go through that entire report with them at the board level and determine what actions we think ought to be. The actuary actually makes a recommendation to us. For example, on investment returns, they suggested somewhere between 7 and 7.5% would be actuarially reasonable. So we went with 7.25. So all the assumptions are evaluated every 5 years.
Councilor Bear?
On the Board of Trustees, you have 13 members.
Yes.
What percentage are recipients of pensions?
I think it could be, I'm not sure, to be honest with you, the answer to the question, but it could be up to 8. It's 4 for sure, 4 employees. There's a teacher,
Yeah.
there's a firefighter, there's a
Yeah.
police person. And then there are 4 that are employers, and some of those employers are also working
Yes, they
as
are.
as employees. So it could be up to 8, but I think in our case it's probably 7. I haven't ever looked at it that way, but I think it's 7. 4 are independent, by the way. So, and I'm sorry, then the state treasurer who would
Who is
be there.
also an
Would all-
employee.
and so that gets you back to 8 or 9,
8, yeah.
possibly, yeah.
How many on the board?
Pardon? 13.
13.
We're 12 right now, we have 1 vacancy.
But what you said, though, is that they're not policymakers. They're not setting the benefit.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. We vote on things like the experience study and setting the assumed rate of return, but we don't set policy.
I appreciate that you came out tonight, and thank you for putting the time out there. I think it'd be great if some of these documents that you provided to us, if you, on an annual basis, we got some sort of communication through our city manager, just
Sure.
to stay current on what the trends are, so we have a sense of fastballs coming at us,
Right. Well, so just in the near term, we set rates again next September. We've had a good, strong investment year. The 5 years look pretty strong. So I think, we'll see a better result this time than we did last time. We're not dealing with assumptions. We're going to look at payroll growth factor, but it's not the same situation as it was the last time we had a rate-setting year.
Thank you.
Okay?
Got one more question for you.
Yes, sir.
On your thing here where your trust fund, in the third quarter, you said you had roughly $8 billion in that grade area, third quarter.
Yes.
So are you saying that you need $13 billion to fund so that it would be totally funded?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, anyone else have any questions or comments? Okay, very informative. Thank you for
Yeah,
taking
thank
the
you for
time to come
coming.
see us
Thank you so
tonight.
much for the opportunity. I appreciate all your questions, and my contact information is there. I'm happy to have a follow-up conversation with any one of you on any of these subjects or anything else.
We appreciate you coming. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Okay, next up on the agenda is a presentation from the New Hampshire Lottery to explain to us everything we ever wanted to know about Keno. And our special guest tonight is the Director of Sales and Product Development for the New Hampshire Lottery, Kelly J. Cleland.
Yes, good evening.
Welcome, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, the city manager, and staff and counselors. Does anyone here know Keno? Has anyone ever played?
Nope,
No.
no clue.
Nobody would admit it if they did.
Well, the state to the south of us, they're very avid Keno players, so sometimes when you travel to another state, you might take part in different games. So we were charged with, by the legislature, to roll out Keno in support of kindergarten, or having full-day kindergarten. So we're now on a mission to make sure that we're educating the cities first and then the towns in the spring about what Keno is, in hopes that you'll put it on your ballot and let your city residents vote on this. So if you look up here, you also have it in your packets in front of you, whichever is more comfortable. I'm just going to go through a few slides to explain what Keno is. And the basic gist of it is that it is a rapid draw numbers game. What that means is it's allowed in pouring establishments, and every 5 minutes from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m., 20 numbers are drawn by computer random number generator, and a person can bet between 1 and 12 spots, different numbers, between 1 and 80, and depending on how much they wager and how many spots they choose, they can win a certain amount, or they may not win a certain amount. So what the legislature determined with this is that it's only in pouring establishments, so bars and restaurants. This is not available at a regular retailer like we service now. We have lottery games, scratch tickets, Mega Millions, Powerball in C-stores, grocery stores. This is a very different venue for us. So you play. I can show you actually the play slip so you can see it here. A person can use the play slip, and they can either give that to a bartender or waiter, or they can go up to a self-service kiosk called an MP. And they fill that out if they want to have Keno Plus, that doubles the cost of the wager. They determine how many spots, and then they choose the spots that they want. So pick your anniversary date, your best friend's birthday, whatever it might be. You pick your spots between 1 and 12, and then how much you want to wager, and how many consecutive plays you want to play. So some people may choose that they just want to play once, and they certainly can. Or they might choose that they want to sit there for 5 rounds of consecutive draws, and they can do that. When they put the play slip into the machine with the cash in there, it spits out their play slip, or their ticket, and then it has what their numbers are, their spots are for each draw. And then every 5 minutes, a computer screen, a monitor will show, Keno Show is what these are called. And you can see here that it chooses the numbers, and depending on how many you match, you win. So it's pretty straightforward. It's a very social game. It's meant to assist bars and restaurants in increasing their check average as well. From research that has been done in other states, it demonstrates that the check average for food and beverage increases due to Keno winnings. People spend longer in an establishment. If they win, they might buy a Heineken rather than a Budweiser, or nachos instead of chips and salsa. So they're just upping what they would normally purchase. And of course, that's good for the meals and room taxes as well. And of course, when somebody wins, what are they doing with that money? they're most likely going to be tipping their bartender or waitress a little bit extra as well. So to the state south of us in Massachusetts, they have I believe it's $150 per capita per person. Their numbers are huge in Keno. And the research shows that 2.5% of the 900 million they do a year in Keno sales, 2.5% of that is from New Hampshire residents. We know that from the claims of 600 and greater that are made at the lottery headquarters. So our goal is to get that money back and have that stay here in our state so our state can reap the benefits. So hopefully we can earn back that and more, depending on what cities and towns pass this. So there's a few different steps to this with the rollout. Of course, first is with you, and if you choose to approve it to go on the local ballot, then it would go there. And if your city residents then voted to support Keno, then there are about 49 establishments here in Laconia that would be eligible per the RSAs through the Liquor Commission. And they would be eligible to fill out an application. It's a $500 application fee with a criminal background check. If they do not pass the background check, they are refunded their $500. If they pass, then we go through the process of ensuring their communications and installing the machines and a monitor. All of the equipment that we install is free to the establishment. There's no charge. We pay for the communications, we pay for the TV monitors, for the pencils and play slips, and we have sales reps that go out and they would service and make sure that they have what they need. They can order paper for the machine through our Telcel folks, that we already do this for all of our other lottery retailers, which we have about 1,200 retailers statewide. So we already have a good amount of the backbone set up to support this. And I went through some of what Keno 603 could do for people. And we do have some of the numbers behind this with the commission. Any restaurant or bar that is licensed to sell Keno receives an 8% commission rate of all sales sold at their facility. That's the highest rate in the U.S. In addition, there are all of the other traditional lottery products, the regular online games, Mega Millions, Powerball, scratch tickets, and for all of the sale of those traditional lottery products, it is a 5% commission. And then on some of those, there's also a cashing commission and then bonuses. So if they sell, for instance, the Hannaford and Raymond last year that sold that huge Powerball ticket, they received $75,000 for selling that ticket. So there's that sort of potential as well for the local establishments. And that's for any prize of $10,000 and greater. It's 1% capped at $75,000. And there's a bonus program on traditional lottery products as well, that if they increase their sales year over year, it's a regular 5% commission, but if they say they increase it $5,000, then it's an extra 5% commission on that extra $5,000. So we really try to work with our retailers to make it a win-win for them and for us. We understand that they're our outlet to sell, and like all of our lottery products, Keno would also be supporting education. I'm not sure if you're aware that all of the proceeds from traditional lottery products go to the Education Trust Fund. So last year that was about $73 million. Yes.
If your projections if we were able to recapture the 2.5% of the mass business, it's like $225 million towards, is that what you're coming up to?
The numbers right now that we're showing would be around $9 million. Those were the projections that we provided the legislature when they were asking.
Be the net proceeds, right, for each year of kindergarten, but
Correct. And each student, any city or town is eligible to receive the funds from this. They don't have to pass it locally to reap the benefits of it. Of course, the more cities and towns that offer Keno, there's more funds to support kindergarten. but it isn't a deal breaker. So if you decided here in Laconia that Keno isn't right for you, it doesn't mean that full-day kindergarten wouldn't be supported financially, and that's about $1,100 per pupil. I believe that the numbers worked out when Director McIntyre spoke with you all, or I believe with you, around $200,000, but I'm not completely sure on those numbers.
Counselor Hamel?
I read somewhere in this that, maybe I'm wrong, that if you do not support, if the city decides not to do it, then they wouldn't get the full share that a city or other town that decided to support it would get. It would be a reduced amount.
I'm not aware of that at all.
It's in the paperwork here somewhere.
Okay. That's news to me. I felt I was pretty familiar with this. I'd be shocked if that was the case.
Okay.
Do you know where you saw that?
Oh, I had a lot to read.
It is a lot to read.
It's in the legislation, you mean?
Yeah, it was,
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
could be wrong, but I read something about that.
Okay, while he's looking.
I'll look and see.
Go ahead.
Okay.
How many other New England states have Keno, and what's their experience been? Do you know?
Sure. Of course, Massachusetts is the big
It's all well
one.
new to me. I never knew Keno 603 existed, so treat
Well-
me like I don't know anything.
It doesn't exist yet. The logo is there. It has been, I think, longest in Massachusetts, but Rhode Island and Connecticut also offer Keno. It's, of course, not branded as Keno 603 there. Maine and Vermont, neither one of those states have Keno.
And for those states that do have Keno, are you basing your revenue projections for New Hampshire based upon their experience, or how are you coming up with this number that we're going to generate if we adopt Keno?
The basic number comes from what's already being claimed in Massachusetts to date. So they were able to verify that from the 2.5% of the total sales in Massachusetts of the claims, those are New Hampshire residents. So that's where the basic premise comes from. Massachusetts is a little bit different, though, because they have it more than just pouring establishments. So you can go to Ted's Mobile right on the other side of the border, and that's, I think, their #1 retailer. And it's just a mobile convenience store where you can play Keno. So it's a very different setup. In Connecticut, they've had a hard time meeting their projection numbers because when they rolled it out, it wasn't one group of restaurants and bars and then regular retailers. They went full throttle with it in Connecticut, so I think that they were a little more challenged. Rhode Island, I'm not exactly sure what their process has been.
Counselor Littman?
It's my understanding that the person who's head of our lottery commission implemented Keno for Massachusetts, is that right?
He was part of that for sure. He was the general counsel in Massachusetts for, I believe, 6 years. And 7 years ago, he became the executive director of the New Hampshire Lottery. So he is familiar with how the game plays and what it can do to bring extra funding to the state.
So go ahead and work your way through your.
Well, I've gone through most of this
Done it.
here.
Okay.
This is just an example of some of the items that we'll provide free of charge. The lower right, it's a neon sign, an apron, so that wait staff have Keno play slips on them if need be. We don't think that majority of the time they're going to be just on the table in the caddy. And then buttons, of course, we'll support with promotions and signage and point of sale materials, as well as TV, radio, online promotions. So
I guess we should ask our clerk if we're to put this on the ballot in November, what's the deadline for doing so?
30 days before. 30 days before.
I can't hear
30
you.
days before.
30 days. Okay, so we have 6 weeks, basically, 6, 7 weeks.
There's also a requirement that if you put it on the ballot, you need to hold a public hearing within 30 days of the municipal election. And if the council chose not to move this to a ballot question, My only thought about it doing it sooner rather than later is there is a citizen petition option where 5% of the folks who voted in the prior municipal election, I think is the way it's worded, can turn in a petition, and it can go on the ballot by petition. So if that was a consideration, you may want to look at it a little bit sooner than working your way up to the
So
30-day window.
would you recommend that we put this on the agenda at our next meeting or our first meeting in September?
I would put it on the August 28th. It's enabling legislation. It would need to go to a ballot question, and that's going to occur at a municipal election in November. Gives people a chance to weigh
So
in
any
on it.
counselor object to having this on our council agenda on the 28th of August? Is that okay?
That's fine.
And so we'll vote that night, presumably whether or not we're going to sponsor having it on the November ballot.
Would we have a public hearing thereafter?
Thereafter, yes.
So we put it on the agenda for the 28th, and we schedule it for a public hearing after that.
Well, I think the public
Yes.
hearing is for voters, not for council consideration so much. as
You
it-
could seek to receive public input as the council as to giving you citizen input as to whether or not you should vote to place it on the ballot. So that would be different than the required
still have to
public
hold the
hearing.
required hearing.
Only if you
Right.
moved it to the ballot, you would be required to hold a public hearing within 30 days of the election, and that would fall, I'd have to look at the calendar, one of our October meetings.
Yeah.
You would have an opportunity with a formal
So
public
we
hearing.
could hold an informal public hearing on the 28th, asking for local input if we wanted to influence council.
Well, I'm not invested whether it's the 28th or the second Monday of September, as long as those timeframes give us something we can work with, but I do think we ought to have a public hearing.
So you want two public
Yeah,
hearings?
two public hearings to address this issue.
So the second public hearing is, you're correct that it's 30 days, but it's between 15 and 30 days for the one that's mandated through the legislation.
Between 15 and 30 before
Correct.
the election.
Correct.
Tell me what the mandated public hearing is. Explain that to me.
It's in the legislation.
Basically, it's in the legislation, it says a community placing it on the ballot shall hold a public hearing on the Keno initiative question between 15 and 30 days before the municipal election.
Just as you can choose to have kindergarten or not have kindergarten, you can choose to have gaming or not have gaming in your community. And I guess,
Yeah.
we've spent a lot of time over the past.
All right, so are the councilors in favor of holding a
makes a
public hearing
difference.
on August 15th prior to our vote? This subject, so the public would have an opportunity to address the council? Is that okay with everybody?
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll put that on the agenda, then a public hearing and a vote under new business on the 28th. Any other questions while we have Ms. Cleveland here?
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much for coming, we appreciate it.
Sure, and if there are any other questions, feel free to reach out to Director McIntyre or myself. We'd be happy to assist.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. One note here for the council's sake before we get into our regular agenda tonight, and that is that we are going to have the need for a non-public session at the conclusion of tonight's meeting to discuss a legal matter.
The night won't be long enough.
I'm sorry?
The night won't be long enough.
Yeah. Okay, we are on to item 7 on the agenda, and that is the acceptance of minutes of the previous meeting. And tonight, we are talking about the minutes of the July 24th regular meeting and the special meeting we had on August 2nd. The minutes to the regular meeting were distributed to the council on August 4th, and no corrections or changes were received at the clerk's office. The minutes to the special meeting were distributed to the council on the 10th of August, and no corrections were received for that one either. So if there are no further corrections to be suggested by councilors tonight, I'm going to declare both sets of minutes to be accepted as distributed by the clerk. Consent and action calendar. We have 2 items tonight on the consent and action calendar. The first one is to request from the Laconia Multicultural Festival per the norm to waive licensing and special event fees for the 2017 event, which is scheduled for September 9th here in downtown Laconia. This is an annual request. And a motion would be in order to waive licensing and special events fee for the 2017 Laconia Multicultural Festival as requested. May I have that motion, Councilor Doyle? Is there a second? Is there a second, please? Councilor Lippman seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor of waiving those fees, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries. Second request is also related to the Multicultural Festival, and that's for the temporary traffic order, which is number 12 for the year, and that is outlined for you on page 25. And no changes from last year, and a motion would be in order to approve the special traffic order with regard to the Laconia Laconia Multicultural Festival on September 9th. Councilor Doyle makes that motion. Is there a second? Councilor Lippman,
Sorry?
second that motion?
Sure, I will.
Councilor Lippman seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor of the temporary traffic order, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, thank you, and that motion carries. Okay, citizen comments for matters not on the agenda. This is the appropriate time at our program tonight for anyone who is with us in the audience who wishes to address the council on a matter that is not on tonight's agenda. Is anyone here who meets that description? Yes. Mr. Dunn.
Yes, sir.
Welcome, sir.
Cal Dunn at the end of Garfield Street. I didn't realize that you had such a heavy agenda tonight, so I'll keep it very brief. I just wanted to discuss a sign that was erected at the end of Garfield Street earlier this spring, around the 1st of May. It reads, "City maintenance ends," and the traffic flow has been dramatically reduced on that hillside. For sure, directly because of that, and we're all very appreciative of that. I initially requested that something of that nature, a dead-end sign or anything relevant to that, in 1995, and even though it took 22 years, we're still just as pleased.
Well, there's a big backlog in the sign shop.
Well, it did make quite a difference, and I don't know if it was the city council and/or the manager or Public Works, but we'd like to give thanks when it's due, and I feel it's appropriate.
All right,
Thank
thank
you.
you. Appreciate it. Anyone else wish to address the council tonight on a matter that is not on tonight's agenda? Okay, we'll move on. We have several interviews scheduled tonight. The first 2 of which are relative to the Conservation Commission. Now, let me find my notes here, if I could. Okay, on the Conservation Commission, we have the terms of 3 regular positions up for appointments. All 3 candidates we're going to talk to tonight have submitted applications for reappointment. 2 will be interviewed this evening, and a third could not make it tonight, Dean Anson, and he will be interviewed on September 11th. Before we get into interviews tonight, I would state for the record and for those of you who are here tonight, and we thank you for coming, these candidates, that by council rule, we do not do interviews and make appointments at the same meeting. So we will be conducting the interviews tonight, and the actual votes will be conducted at our next meeting, which is September 11th. You're welcome to attend those meetings if you like, if you're a candidate, but it is not necessary that you do so. So first off, we're going to speak with Marnie Blaisdell Schultz. Is she here tonight? Yes, hi. Come forward, please. And if you would, and the other candidates would tell the council where you live and why you would like to be reappointed to the Conservation Commission.
I live at 5 Andover Place here in Laconia. I've been on the commission for a few years. I've enjoyed it. I feel that we do a great service to the city because we look at things a little bit differently than most people do.
Okay, thank you. Any questions or comments from Ms. Blaisdell?
Thank you for coming forward.
Okay, don't hear any. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up is Richard Christopher, also seeking reappointment to the Conservation Commission. Mr. Christopher? Welcome, sir. Where you live and why you would like to be reappointed.
I live on Kensington Drive in Laconia, and I've served out I think it's close to a 2-year term for a previous person that moved away on the commission. And in that time, I've learned a lot about subdivisions and buildings and conservation regarding issues in the city. And I've participated in a lot of the discussions, and I think I've provided valuable input. My background is engineering, outside plant engineering in the telephone company, 36 years of engineering, done a lot of the work in this city, all the undergrounding that went on downtown. I've worked with numerous developers all over the state, both individual buildings, large developments, construction, and so I have a pretty good understanding of what they do. I've seen a lot of good construction, and also I've seen a lot of poor construction over those 36 years. And I want to ensure that any new construction in the city is done with proper conservative principles.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Christopher?
Thank you for coming forward.
All right, thank you. Okay, we are on to the Downtown TIF Advisory Board, and we have Patrick Wood with us this evening, who is seeking reappointment to a regular position on that board. And also note for the record, for the councilors who aren't aware of this, Ken Sawyer, who's on that board, recently resigned, which leaves, at present, one position vacant. Mr. Wood, thank you for coming.
Mr. Mayor.
Welcome.
I'm Patrick Wood. I live at 717 Shore Drive, but I have an office downtown Laconia at 635 Main Street, Suite 302. I've been on the Downtown TIF Advisory Board since its inception, and even before then, involved in what was called the Riverfront, or the River Walk Committee. I've been involved in downtown events, well, basically ever since I've been in Laconia, one way or the other, whether the Downtown Association, through the Chamber, or just personally wandering around downtown. I have a great deal of interest in making the downtown as strong and as healthy as it possibly can be. I know that there are a lot of things that we would all like to see accomplished in downtown. The big question is, how do we do that, and how do we pay for that? The TIF committee obviously has a certain amount of ability to help with that, but it can't do the job completely. So I would like to continue in those efforts and working with the city council to try to find solutions to some of those nagging problems that we have, and perhaps deal with some new things that we haven't thought about entirely.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Mr. Wood? For Mr. Wood?
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we thank you for your
Thank
past
you.
service and appreciate your coming tonight. We are on to the Zoning Board of Adjustment. 2 regular positions on the Zoning Board of Adjustment are up for appointment, and we have 2 incumbents who have submitted applications for reappointment. There are 5 currently vacant alternate positions on the Zoning Board of Adjustment, for the record. And first up tonight, we have Suzanne Purley. Ms. Purley, welcome.
Hi, Suzanne Purley. I live on Hickory Stick Lane in Laconia, and been on the zoning board for a while. As a matter of fact, I went back and looked at the records, and I was first appointed in 2007. So that's too long. And I know the planning department is trying to get more volunteers. As you said, we have a lot of alternate positions. I think that's really important, and I hope we can draw some more people to this board, because I would like to retire at some point. But it is a 5-member board, and we have a long agenda every month, and we're really committed to what we do. And for the time being, I will stay as long as needed, so if that's your decision.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions for Mrs. Purley?
Thank you for coming.
Again, on behalf of all of us, we thank you for your past service and for volunteering again. Next up is Stephen Bogert, who has been serving as the chair of the Zoning Board of Adjustment.
Good evening, everybody. How are y'all tonight?
Good.
Good, how are you?
My name's Stephen Bogert, 21 Spruce Street, Ward 5. I've been really happy to be able to serve the city in this capacity since 2004. And prior to that, I've served on a zoning board in the previous city I lived in Miramar, Florida, where we did a lot of accomplishments if anybody searched that city. But I felt it was very important to continue that and have been honored to work with the zoning in the city here. And I think we've done a pretty good job over the years. There's been some bumps in the roads, but you know, that's to be expected. It's reviewing all the regulations and stuff like the legislature puts for us, the state, the city, and we try to abide by them and interpret them to the best of our abilities. So I'd like to continue in this role if y'all do see fit.
Any questions for Mr. Bogert? Councilor Lippman.
One of the things I think the past couple of years we've worked through is a new sign ordinance, right? And
yes,
can you give us some perspective on how that's working or not working at this point?
I think for the most part it's working. We've had a few requests in the downtown riverfront district to where they would like to add the digital print signs and stuff. I'm not quite so sure. You know, that's not up to us. It's in the regs that it's not allowed, that they have the traditional signs that are set up, and therefore that's what we've abided by.
So these have been variance requests?
That's correct. I've had been approached by one business owner on Union Ave discussing the frequency of changing of the sign, the copy, to be more frequent. In this case, this business owner has several businesses within his property, and he would like to be able to advertise different things. He now has a used car lot on his property also, and so I think that's where it's coming from. But for the most part, I haven't heard any negatives from it. You know, it's going to work, and as with any things that we adopt, it's going to grow as the situations change and stuff. But we haven't seen fit to apply any variances. We've had no variance request except for the one in the downtown riverfront district.
Any other questions for Mr. Bogert?
Thank you for coming.
Okay, appreciate your service, sir. Long service.
Yes.
As several of our
Thank you,
appointees
Steve.
tonight, and appreciate your coming tonight. And again, we'll be voting on these 5 appointments tonight at our next meeting on September 11th. Next up, we have 3 public hearings to conduct. The first is on resolution number 20 for 2017, and that is relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $20,000 for mobile data terminal equipment for the police department. Notice of this public hearing was made in the Wednesday, July 26, 2017 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also published at City Hall, it was also posted at Laconia City Hall, the Gale Memorial Library, the Laconia Community Center, the offices of the Laconia School District. And note for the record, action tonight is scheduled for this, on this resolution, which is printed on page 67. Action is scheduled tonight to be taken on this resolution under unfinished business. So is there anyone with us tonight who wishes to offer testimony to the City Council on resolution number 20? I will open the public hearing at 19 minutes past 8. Oh, okay, we'll say for the record that it's now 20 minutes past 8, and that hearing is closed. Next up is resolution number 21 for 2017, and that's printed on page 68 of your packet, relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $2,700 for e-ticket equipment for the police department. Likewise, notice of this public hearing was made in the Wednesday, July 26, 2017 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun and was also posted at City Hall, the Gale Memorial Library, the Laconia Community Center, and the offices of the Laconia School District. And again, action on this resolution will be taken up tonight under unfinished business. So we'll call it 8:21 at this point in time and ask if there's anyone who would like to address the council on resolution number 21. All right, we'll close the public hearing then at, we'll call it 8:22 p.m. and move on to the next item of business, which is a public hearing on the declaration of city streets as emergency lanes. And we'll read for the record here. Well, first of all, let me say notice of this public hearing was made in the Tuesday, August 1st, 2017 edition of the Laconia Daily Sun. It was also posted at City Hall, the Gale Memorial Library, the Laconia Community Center, and at the offices of the Laconia School District. Action on this item will be taken at the next council meeting on August 28th, not tonight. So we'll take testimony tonight, but action on this item will be taken up at our next meeting on August 28th. So the following streets are being considered for declaration as emergency lanes. 1, Cotton Hill Road from the boundary line with the town of Guilford to the dead end. Dell Avenue from Jefferson Street to Appleton Street. Eastman Shore Road North from Eastman Road to the dead end. Lucerne Avenue from Endicott Street to the dead end. McKinley Road from Pendleton Road to Zebley Shore Road. Regis Road from Ashley Drive to Pendleton Road, and finally Wentworth Avenue from Pleasant Street to the dead end. So I'm going to declare this public hearing open at 22 minutes past 8 and ask if there's anyone with us tonight who would like to address the council on declaring these streets in Laconia to be emergency lanes. And please, when you come to the microphone, let us know your name and your address before you start testimony. Thank you.
I'm Marge Cadrat, and I live at the corner of Dell Avenue and Jefferson Street. And I really would like to, and it has been all along, I've been living at this corner for 29 years, and I think, you know, I'd like to see the ambulance and the fire trucks and everybody else repairing the street to keep on the good work they've been doing so far. After all these years, I don't see why they would stop it, unless you're trying to save money.
Okay, well, what I can tell you is quickly, and for those other people in the audience tonight, the reason we're in this predicament, if you want to call it that, is that in researching the city records, there are a number of streets in town for which there is no paper trail that they were ever authorized or accepted as city streets to begin with. Most, if not all, of these streets have been maintained over the years as city streets, but there's no paper trail as to when and how they were accepted as city streets. So that's how we are where we are today.
And can you stop it after having done this for so many years?
Mayor, I think the other piece of the puzzle is the insurance companies with respect to liability on the roads, and then with respect to the legislature in terms of what roads can be considered for highway assistance in terms of the formula. Those are I think the three
Now, the
factors.
reason it's become an issue is because, and this is an issue all over the state, is because the underwriters of liability insurance policies, as Councilor Lippman said, have declared that they will not cover city activity on a private street. So we have to, in effect, show that the streets are public. And if they're not public streets, one way around that, which is what we're talking about tonight, is to officially declare them to be emergency ways.
So does it depend how many
Then we can
homes there
maintain
is
them.
on that street?
I'm sorry?
Does it depend how many homes there is
No.
on that street? No, that doesn't have any effect.
In other words, there's a process by which we could declare it to be a public street, but it's long and laborious. The shortcut, in effect, is to declare it an emergency way, which
Okay.
allows us to continue to maintain it as we have.
Okay.
And so that's the legal counsel has recommended that as the course of action that we take. We've already done it on some streets. That to our, the most obvious one is perhaps Tremont Street, which connects Pleasant Street and North Main Street. It's only 2 blocks long, and when we went to repair the street last year and water main work was done on it, we discovered that there was no record of it ever being accepted as a city street, although clearly it's been a city street by practice for decades. So we took we declared it as an emergency way, which allows us then to fix it and maintain it.
Okay.
So that's
thank
what
you.
we're talking about tonight. In
So I
your
have to
street, which
come
is in
back.
Lakeport, right?
Yes.
So what we're talking about is declaring your street to be an emergency way, which would allow us to legally maintain the status quo and keep our insurance policy in effect on it.
And continue plowing the streets and taking care of them.
Right.
So you understand that. That's,
Yes.
Now, there's
So I have-
one cautionary issue there, which I think the city manager would like to address.
Well, so we have two components that two items I would like to speak to right now. So one is, we are going to be bringing forward our policy for the level of maintenance for the council consideration. We wanted to get some input from residents tonight as we start this first phase, and we've got these 6 or 7 streets we're looking to declare as emergency lanes on the August 28th agenda, and that'll be posted ahead of time, so everybody can go online or come down to City Hall and we can get you a hard copy. There'll be a document that's talking about staff's proposed policy for the level of maintenance that will provide on these roads. So the goal will be to keep them passable, plowed, general maintenance for the streets, but not necessarily new pavement going forward. So that'll be a policy discussion we'll be asking for the council, and that was one of the reasons that we wanted to get some input tonight before we finalize those policies to bring them to you. Bigger picture statement, all of the streets that are before you tonight have staff recommendation that these should be emergency lanes based on different criteria, but there's no one on Public Works staff or myself or that is looking to say, we need to hold the public hearing, but we're opposed to having these streets declared emergency lanes. So if that helps in any of your comments, these are actually staff recommendations to bring forward. I won't say these are necessarily low-hanging fruit, but out of the 40 or so, 47 streets we're dealing with, we'll say these are the low-hanging fruit. These were the easy ones and the ones that, seemed more obvious, and we started here. So there's no one, staff-wise, that's looking to oppose these streets from having that emergency lane declaration, which would allow for continued maintenance at some level.
One of the issues, and again, I'm speaking to you, ma'am, but to the audience in general as well, because I know there are other people here tonight who have the same issues and concerns on their streets, is that there are instances in Laconia where you have a street that everyone thinks is a public street and has been maintained as a public street forever, but the city actually doesn't have a deed to it. And the property lines actually go to the middle of the street, so that the homeowners actually own the street. So in order the long way around would be to have the city take over literal ownership of that property, which it doesn't have now. And you can guess that if there are 30 houses on the street, or 20 or 10, what a chore that would be to get everyone to agree to do that. So that's another issue.
So I don't have to come next month to the meeting.
We'd love to see you, but you don't have to.
I don't have to. Very good. Thank you.
All right. Anyone else? Don't be shy. Here we go. Okay.
My name is Robert Owen. I'm at 156 Eastman Shore Road North. We are not year-round residents, but the property has been within our family for about 70 years. It's interesting because I never heard my relatives talk about this being a private road. I'd like to just clarify one thing. If it's decided not to call this an emergency way, it's my understanding that the residents on, in this case, Eastman Shore Road North, would be responsible for paying for the grading, the plowing, and anything else to do with that road. Is that correct?
Yes.
With ample notice. No one's going to be cut off on
I would
short.
like to go on the record of saying we would, the emergency provision makes sense, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Ma'am, you were up next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the community. My name is
You
Maureen.
could get closer to the microphone,
Oh,
please.
okay.
Thank you.
I did prepare a couple of things that I wanted to make sure I said. Hopefully, it's not too redundant. But so I'm here. My name is Maureen Guglielmino, and I live at 166 Eastman Shore Road. And I'm here in complete support of declaring Eastman Shore Road an emergency lane. Obviously, the city of Laconia had seen it fit to provide minimal maintenance and ensure emergency vehicle access for the last 50-plus successive years. The historical precedent for safeguarding the public safety of residents on Eastman Shore Road to, ensure ease of emergency access is fairly clear and well established. And just from a personal note, based on the city's maintenance of the road over the last several decades, my husband and I decided to make an investment here in Laconia in 1997. And had the town not been providing the maintenance, and had we not known that there would come a time that potentially they would not, we certainly never would have purchased the property. We then decided in 2012 to reinvest in our property, and we rebuilt and decided to move our permanent resident from Laconia to Wyndham. So the city had continued to maintain the road as it had for decades, so we went ahead and rebuilt. Were it not for that, we wouldn't have built our home on Eastman Shore Road. And why? So because, number one, we wouldn't be guaranteed that we would be safe, that our family would be safe, our grandchildren would be safe, families and visitors, et cetera, that came to our house. And number two, the city's maintenance of the road throughout the 50s and 60s and 70s and 80s and 90s to this day eliminated the need for an association in the road, like some roads do when they first start up their road. They create an association. And those associations have covenants, and they have legally binding documents that dictate the terms of an association. And when you move into an area, you sign up for that and you agree to that. Here we are today with approximately 30 homes on this road. It's a dirt road, for those of you that may not immediately recall, a dirt road, a dead-end dirt road. Some are seasonal, some are year-round, and many of these are owned by senior citizens. It would be difficult, if not virtually impossible, to get, as you said, Mr. Mayor, 30 homeowners to agree, if not possibly, even if they agreed, would have the wherewithal and the means to take on the financial burden of, on top of their taxes, to maintain the road. And that puts the rest of the people that maybe can't afford to do it, or others that at risk. So I would just say that with the designation of an emergency lane and the continued maintenance to our dirt road, we're assured that our families have basic access to protection from harm and some of the dangers that require public safety vehicles. I'm thrilled the state law authorizes you to designate Eastman Shore Road as an emergency lane. We don't benefit or realize any gain by this designation that is greater than any public safety access provided to any other taxpayer in the town. The road will still be dirt, it'll still be full of potholes and inconvenient problems, but should someone be having a heart attack or someone lose a limb due to a home accident, as we have had in my family personally, a fire break out in someone's kitchen, we at least know that we will have a fair shot at the same chance for protection and public safety. So with that, I thank you and fully endorse and support that designation.
All right, thank you for coming tonight. Yes, sir.
Hello, everybody. My name is Barry Wilk. I live at 272 Pleasant Street on the corner of Pleasant and Wentworth. I don't live on Wentworth, but my driveway is off Wentworth, okay? So I think there's only 4 or 5 homes, or 4 homes on that street, but you know, I've lived there for 21 years, and for 21 years, the town has done a super job of servicing the street. You know, my next door neighbor also lives facing Pleasant Street. His driveway is also on Wentworth, so if they stopped servicing the street, then, you know, our driveways would not be serviced, and the 2 homes deeper on Wentworth wouldn't be serviced as well. So I came just, not because I'm a Wentworth, you know, person, but my house is on Pleasant, but I access Wentworth every single day to and from work. So I fully support the emergency lane and just hope very much that the town officials, you know, pass that ordinance to keep it as it has been. So thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hi, I'm Tom Hoy. I actually live on Wentworth Avenue. It's the shortest of the streets, so this will be the shortest comment. Thank you very much for finding the solution to the problem.
You're welcome. Mr. Dunn.
Thank you, councilors. Cal Dunn in Laconia. I don't live on any one of these streets, but in listening to the taxpayers, I wonder if they are, how well informed they are about this declaration. I don't know as if they've ever been notified that once they make the transition to emergency roads, that the city, not suggesting that this board would, but at any point could discontinue it. Just like that. And also, you know, after years of maintenance, I mean, it would be up to the taxpayers to check into, but the city theoretically, according to law, to my understanding, has accepted these roads by its maintenance already. So just because it's a paperwork issue with the city, I don't think the taxpayers should be burdened with this. They'll be placed on a much lower maintenance scale. Emergency lanes, according to law, is the bottom of the maintenance. It's merely enough to keep it accessible. And I don't know how they were notified or if they had looked into anything, but I think that they should be aware of their options and know that if anyone objected to this declaration on a particular road, it would not be granted. Thank you.
Can you offer any insight on those comments? 2 in particular. One, we don't need unanimous consent to declare emergency way, do we?
If there is a direct abutter on the street in question who objects to the declaration of an emergency lane because of the feeling of it's private or it was never meant to be public, then yes, that could derail that street from being declared.
Okay,
an
so if
emergency.
one resident of Eastman Shore Road North said, no, I don't want it to be an emergency way, that would kill the effort.
That would kill this emergency lane, and then we would need to continue the research of was it intended to be, how was it laid out, was it ever accepted?
Go the long way
which is
around.
the long way around of doing it. I don't agree with one of the statements that Mr. Dunn made. I agree with most of what he said, but just because we've been maintaining a road for a certain number of years doesn't mean we're required, obligated to continue that maintenance.
So there's
the
no
law is
adverse
very clear.
possession, so to speak,
No,
of...
no.
Okay, anyone else? Yes, sir.
Thank you, guys. My name's Darren Minnick. I'm 17 Wentworth Avenue. And as far as I understand, the maintenance as far as plowing and sanding, that's all good and fine. But my question, I guess, is utilities underground. I have city water and city sewer. That would still be maintained as part of the city infrastructure, or how would that?
It's because you are a ratepayer, and so you're a member, so to speak, of the, you're a stockholder, in effect, of the water system by being a ratepayer, so, yes.
So that would, they're not going to not come and work on the sewer because
Correct.
they're not going to do road maintenance and all that? All right.
Right.
All right, that's my question. Thank you.
And just one other point, Mr. Mayor, if I could, hopefully without taking the long way around and expending staff time dedicated to research, hopefully some of these will uncover just during the course of normal business and review of plan sites, and all of a sudden come across a document of, oh yeah, this is when it was accepted type of stuff. So if that were to be the case and we have, evidence, if you will, of when it was accepted, then the emergency lane declaration goes away. And there's actually a benefit to the city if we know that it was a public street. It ties into our miles of roads that we turn into the New Hampshire Department of Transportation, which goes into the highway block grant formula, which is the distribution of the gas tax monies that we all pay when we fill up. That's distributed through a formula, and part of it is based on miles of roads. So we will continue to look to determine, that these roads are public, and if that's the case, that's better for everybody.
Who's next?
I do have one additional question. Because of the, I guess it's recently discovered status of Eastman Shore Road North and other, does Eastman Shore Road and the other streets that are under consideration here that are not paved, have they in the past and up till now received any different level of maintenance in terms of grading, plowing, other maintenance issues as compared to any other unpaved road in the city of Laconia, which is a city street?
Can you answer that?
I would say that up until, the discovery of these streets as having some questionable identity, we've maintained all unpaved roads to the same level of service, if you will.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Yes, sir.
Hi, my name is Larry Kivimaki at 176 Eastman Shore Road. First of all, I appreciate the level of maintenance on Eastman Shore Road over many decades. We've been there about 19 years, and many decades before that, my understanding is that road has been quite adequately maintained, the re-graveling and whatever. It's your description about the ownership of the road, because when we heard it was like a private road, if it's private, who owns it? I think the description, I own half of the road in front of my property, potholes included, I guess, and I guess I don't know what I'm allowed to do about that section of road, and I really don't want to do anything about it. But it sounds like it's an untenable long-term solution without any kind of a body owning that, other than looking at going forward, what would it take to make Eastman Shore Road North a public road in the longer term? My understanding is that Eastman Shore Road South is a public road. I don't know if you can verify that. And if you look at those two roads,
paper trail on South.
the structure of those roads, the width and the gravel and the maintenance that occurs is virtually identical. There's really no difference in terms of usage. So I would encourage this council to look at a longer-term approach to clean up whatever the cleanup of the paperwork is, to look at making it a long-term, public road. And I don't know what your comment might be about that, but thank you.
So the question is, once we declare, assuming we declare Eastman Shore Road North as a emergency way, is that going to end the city's effort toward long-term determining whether or not there is a paper trail, that it actually was accepted at some point as a city street, or would we take the long way and say a goal of the city is to say at some point in time we will attempt to make it a public street?
So a couple of questions there. There was been a significant amount of staff time that was going to try to work on a couple of streets.
And we knew if we bid off the whole 50, we'd be in trouble.
So we've decided to go the emergency lane. So I think within the normal course of staff time and availability of staff time and review, we will continue to try to determine the ownership. As I stated before, it's in the benefit of, for a lot of reasons, to declare that. At the same time, if we were to discover something, as we have on a street or two, that it clearly states this is a private road, it was always intended to be a private road, then we need to follow that as where the research may take us. So sometimes doing additional investigation may not necessarily yield for the answer that you hope for. So we've been working to identify, to do at least the stopgap, to make sure that a level of service that is provided on roads, certain roads for years, that we know for certain are not private roads, but there's question about the ownership, that we will continue to maintain that. Beyond there are things that, if we want to get into it tonight, we can, but I'm just hoping to do it more in the policy in 2 weeks. But some more recent streets that have come in, for whatever reason, a contractor has not completed the road, but maybe the development is only 20 or 30 years old, and there's base course of pavement down. Discounts with the majority of you are on Phoenician Way. We went out and we worked with the neighbors and set up a betterment assessment district where the money wasn't there to do the final paving on a relatively new subdivision. Collectively, they formed, put a petition, requested, the council went out and held a site walk, held a meeting on the street. At the citizens' request, the majority of them, that does not have to be unanimous, agreed to put a construction lien, if you will, a betterment assessment lien on their property so that they could pay in conjunction with their tax bill a small payment for X number of years in order to bring that road up to the level that was intended to be by maybe a contractor going bankrupt before the project was complete and that final work not being done. The intention was for Phoenician Way, in this example, to always be a city street. We couldn't accept it because at the time it didn't meet the final standards, maybe on drainage, maybe on streetscape planting, maybe on the final coat of asphalt, to where it met our standards where we could accept it. So there's a couple of items to look at. We will continue to try to take the gray area out of these emergency lanes, but I'm not going to tell you that we've got the staff resources to be going through our records, or in some cases to be going down to Concord and looking through records.
I should not have implied, if I did earlier, that if it's a private street, it means that the abutting residents own the street, and it's in their deed that they own the street. That is the case in some instances, but it's also, as the city manager just pointed out, just as likely in a lot of cases where, for whatever reason, the developer who owned the street and put in the street never got around to officially transferring it to be a city street, because he went bankrupt or left town or who knows for what reason. But it just never happened that it was actually deeded over to the city. Anyone else?
Robert Lemro at 243 Eastman Shore Road North. I'm the last house on the road, and many days I work from home. I get UPS deliveries, I get FedEx deliveries. If the main road stops getting maintained, I won't get any of that. I won't be able to work from my home. I won't be able to, I'll lose my livelihood basically. Along with all the facts that everybody else has said here, we wouldn't be able to have fire trucks get down there in the middle of the winter. Police department couldn't come down and check anybody's homes. It just doesn't seem reasonable to me that you would just yank that out from underneath us. Like everybody said here, they've been doing a fantastic job over the years. I'm a pretty new person here. By the way, my lot lines end at the edge of the road, not in the middle of the road, since I just bought it and checked all that. It would be an astronomical burden to the 30-plus homes on that road to take that away from us.
Well, I think that's the reason we're headed in the direction we are.
Oh, I appreciate it.
Can I say something?
Mr. Hamel.
It sounds like there's some confusion as why we're doing this. We're not doing it to take things away from you. We're doing it to try and continue what we're doing within the law.
Right.
If you can follow what I'm saying.
Well,
The-
to a degree.
well, no.
I'm hearing that it's going to be.
Well, this is the
downgraded.
only way that we can continue doing it. We found out about this, was it middle of last summer, fall, something like that? You know, we've got 40-something miles of road. Molten Borough's got over 200 that they got to deal with.
40-something streets, not miles.
Streets, I'm sorry, yeah, streets.
7
Yeah.
miles, I think it was.
But what we're trying to do, and going through the attorneys and the municipal association attorneys and all this, we're trying to find out what we can do.
Right.
And this is a way that we can do it.
It's a Band-Aid.
So it's
This is the way our attorney has advised us to proceed in order to be able to continue doing what we've always done.
That's not what I heard, though. I heard that it's
What
going
did
to
you
be
hear?
something lesser than what you've always done.
No, I think I was clear that we want to establish the policy, and the council, as the legislative body, will be able to set the policy for the level of service, and that's why we wanted some input tonight. And then we've got a draft that we may make some modifications to.
And we're
based
going
on
to,
what we've heard
we're
tonight.
going to look at that policy for the first time at our next meeting on the 28th, that policy suggestion.
And that'll be available for us to review it when?
Absolutely. The agendas are always posted by Friday. They're on the website. There's a link, and you can pull up the entire agenda with the background information. The same 80 or so pages that the city council gets are available to the public every single meeting that we have.
Great. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Amy Kivimaki, and I live at 176 Eastman Shore Road North. And this is a question and point of order in that if and how does one person put the kibosh on the whole thing? I mean, in the sense that, will somebody call you in the next 2 weeks and say, I live at such and such Eastman Shore Road North, and I don't want this?
Technical question. Do you have an answer
Technical,
to that?
just,
I think we need to do something in writing just versus a phone call, and I think at that point, we probably would put a hold on this while we dedicated some staff time to trying to follow the paper trail back as far as we could to determine once and for all whether it was always meant to be a
But-
city street.
Using this road as an example, before we vote to declare Eastman Shore Road North as a emergency way, do we need to have something in writing from every property owner on that road?
No.
We don't.
that's what I'm...
The
I'm
onus
okay.
is on someone to come down and make themselves known if they would object to the emergency.
They would have to come on the 28th.
I don't know if they would have to come on the 28th. They would have to come in and
Before the council or to your office?
I think I'm going to defer to Wes. I think he's got a little more background on Wes Anderson, our Public Works Director, but I think even after the declaration, somebody could come down and say, for whatever reason, that they no longer wanted the emergency lane declaration, and under which scenario we would step up our efforts on the research of that road because of it potentially being a drastic change.
Okay, thank you very much.
Anyone else? Okay, I'm going to declare this public hearing closed at 8:52 PM and remind everyone again that the council will take this matter up again at our next meeting, as well as the accompanying policy recommendations from the staff in terms of maintenance level. Next up on the agenda is mayor's report. And the subject tonight for the mayor's report is the Colonial Theater renovation project. And it is my intent tonight to brief the council on the status of that project at present. And so I kind of have an outline here of things that I want to speak to tonight with regard to the Colonial project, and then I would be happy to attempt to answer any and all questions that the council might have with regard to that at this point in time. So I'm going to start by reminding the council, not that there's a need to, that we presently have $1.4 million out, we, the city, out on loan to the Belknap Economic Development Council that we loaned them for the purchase of the Colonial Theater in July of 2015. And that note is due and payable on August 31st of this year. And that we have already, as we both know, as we all know, granted 2 extensions on that note. It was originally due at the end of last year, and then we extended it to April 30th, and then we extended it again to August 31st. And so I'm delivering the news tonight that the Belknap Economic Development Council will be coming to our next meeting on August 28th to notify officially the council that they will not be able to meet that deadline, and to ask for a further extension to December 31st of this year. So that's an alert to the council at this point in time that that will be happening at our next meeting, and that will be on the agenda for the next meeting. If that extension is approved by the city council on August 28th, the new due and payable date would be December 31st, as I said, and the city would continue to collect interest from BEDC at the rate of approximately $4,000 a month, which is what we're collecting now. So that interest would continue in effect until that note is retired. The primary reasons for the need for this extension are, A, the last time the due and payable date was extended, the primary reason given was to give BEDC time to secure the federal historic tax credits that were going to contribute, or are going to contribute, approximately $2.4 million to the project. And those tax credits have still not been approved by the federal government at this date. Although the application is in Washington, it has been approved at the state level and been sent to Washington, where they are reviewing it at the federal level. And that application, we have been told by the state officials, was praised by the federal officials as being the most thorough application they had ever seen. And it is viewed as a matter of formality now that in due course those tax credits will be granted to the city. And as I have said before, those tax credits have already in effect been pre-sold. So there's no sale. There's a large multinational bank has agreed to buy those tax credits in their entirety. And so that's largely a formality at this point in time. And the only thing that's holding that up, I can advise you, is that, and I'm going to get to some detail of this in a minute, is that we still haven't finalized the exact scope of the project and cost of the project. And because of that, the tax credit application continues to be a moving target, because every time that we decide to put something in the budget or take something out of the budget, it affects the overall project, and then the application has to be amended again to say, we've decided to do X with room Y, and because of that, the application now has to have a slight amendment to it again, because everything we do to any part of the building that's public, available to the public, has to be approved as historic in nature, or not out of bounds in terms of the reason why we're getting these historic tax credits in the first place. So that's item number one. Second reason is, as I advised you some months ago, the construction bids, which came in around April 1, came in some $3.3 million over the original construction.
What was that amount?
$3.3 million. And as I advised you at an earlier date, the value engineering aspect of that followed because of that, to try to get the prices down and whatnot, close that gap. But there still was a need to raise an additional $1 million in order for the project to go forward. And in that realm, BEDC has identified 2 new funding sources here in the state to close that budget gap. But it's going to take some time for that cash to actually materialize. And from the Community Development Finance Authority is one of those sources, for example. And so we have every indication at this point in time, and have been advised by Jack Dugan that process is progressing very satisfactorily, but it will be sometime this fall before that money is actually available to BEDC to be used to close the deal, so to speak. Another thing I should mention on the cost side is that the value engineering project itself cut into bone on the theater side of things, and that the team representing the city over the past few months, which has consisted of Scott Myers and Councilor Bounds and myself, the 3 of us, have been working through any number of meetings over the last several months to get a handle on this. So what I'm saying is that in the value engineering phase, and those of you who have been involved in construction projects before that take this process into account, it's one thing as an academic exercise to say, well, just throw that out and we'll save $500,000. It's another thing to say, well, what's the point? I think Councilor Hamel mentioned at a previous meeting when we discussed this, what's the point of doing the project in the first place if you're going to throw that out? And so it's technically, as an academic exercise, possible to get down to the budget by just tossing things out. You can design a car that doesn't have an engine and it might come in under budget, but you still got a car with no engine. And so the car's, what use is it if it has no engine? So that's the analogy I would use. So the 3 of us on the city side have attended any number of meetings over the past few months and continue almost on a daily basis now to be working with BEDC and their various consultants and architects and engineers to put a dollar figure on, an exact dollar figure on what we think it's going to cost to restore the things to the project that were taken out in the value engineering phase that absolutely need to be restored as far as we're concerned. And that still is a work in progress, but what I can tell you tonight is that our intent, and when I say our, I'm talking about the 3 of us again, our intent is to come to you on September 11th that's our first meeting in September, with that very detailed list of what we think needs to be added back into the project in order to make it worth doing and a success. And with the understanding that that recommendation is going to require an additional investment on the city's part in order to happen. Everybody understand what I'm saying there? So we don't have a specific proposal to give you tonight because it's still a work in progress. But on September 11th, it is the 3 of us intent to come to you with a very detailed proposal of exactly what we think needs to be added back into the project, which isn't in it as of today. With the understanding that if those things are going to happen, the city is going to have to step up to the table and invest more money in the project, which means, in effect, an additional amount of loan to the project. The third thing, and this is the most important, critical reason why the closing date can't be met in the month of August and the extension is necessary, is because the closing on the new markets tax credits, and to refresh everyone's memory, the so-called new markets tax credits, federal tax credits, are going to end up being somewhere in the neighborhood of $4.8 million to $5.5 million. So it's a huge chunk of the project. And the reason that that's a floating number is because the The tax credits that we earn, that BEDC earns, are dependent on what the overall investment level in the entire project is. So as we add and subtract to the construction budget, we add and subtract to the exact amount of tax credits that we will get credit for. So that's why I'm giving you a range there. But the issue is that Mascoma, so we're dealing with what's called a CDE, Community Development Entity, and the community development entities around the country apply for and are granted tax credit allocations by the federal government. And the only CDE operating in northern New Hampshire, in northern New England, I should say, is Mascoma Bank of Hanover. And that's who we have been, BEDC has been dealing with here. And they get a yearly allotment of these tax credits as part of their business. And what happened here literally is that they were ready to push that money out the door based on their 2017 allotment back in April. And because BEDC couldn't make that deadline because of these other reasons, they had to push that money out the door in order to get another allocation for 2018. In other words, if they hadn't done that, then they would have a hard time justifying to the federal government that they should get a new allocation when they didn't use the old allocation. So at some point in late spring, early summer, they made the determination to put the Colonial project on hold and push the money out the door that was originally intended to go to the Colonial project to a different project. So that's exactly what happened. So as a result of that, the Colonial project, which they still maintain their highest level of interest in, and the investor who intends to buy these $5 million worth of tax credit remains interested in buying them. But because the 2017 allocation is no longer available, BEDC has to wait for the 2018 allocation, which will come from the federal government. It's already been budgeted by Congress, but the actual allocation award will not be given to Mascoma Bank until sometime this fall, probably late fall. So that's why. So even if everything else were perfectly in order today, we could not close the construction deal at this point in time because the New Markets tax credit money is not available.
BEDC that closes the construction.
I'm sorry?
BEDC closes the construction.
Yes. Yeah, well, I said we, I should say BEDC. So that's the primary reason why it's literally impossible to close this deal. Even if we went with the original construction budget and said we'll go without all the things that were taken out of the budget, we still couldn't close because we don't have the New Markets tax credit money at this point in time. So those pieces have to come together by the end of the year, and let's all be honest with ourselves. That New Market tax credit allocation has got to come in by the end of the year, and so we're waiting on that. And then the project itself, a combination of BEDC looking for additional resources, plus City Council making a decision on whether it's willing to invest more money in the project to do the job right. Those factors have all got to come together between now and the end of the year in order for this project to go forward. And that's where we are today. So step number one is going to be BEDC coming to us in 2 weeks and formally asking for and hopefully being granted the extension they need to get to the first of the year. And two, on September 11th, we begin detailed discussion about adding to the cost of the project by putting stuff back in that was taken out.
So two questions. The loan is paying us an interest rate better than what we
3.5%.
would otherwise have the money used. What you're talking about, an additional investment, is in the form of an additional increase in the loan amount? Is that what
Yes.
you're talking about? So not a investment in the true sense of
Being an owner, no.
being an owner, it's in a loaning additional money,
Yes.
which, assuming performance puts us in a better position than if we have the money in reserves that is earning a lower rate.
Yeah, and we're working through, Scott and I and David are working through the details of that, and we will, again, on September 11th, we will present you with a detailed proposal of not only how much and what for, but where the money can come from and how, in other words, how we will pay for it. So right now, we're scheduled to loan BEDC at closing $3 million, which is 1.6 million more than we have out on loan now. But we'll get that 1.4 back at closing and then add to that 1.6. So the way things are at this moment, at closing, we would come to the table with $3 million. And that $3 million, the city manager is planning to take strictly out of fund balance. Okay? So there's no call, we wouldn't have to borrow any of it, there'd be no debt service, and in effect, we would be making money on that part of it because the spread between what we're getting from having that money in CDs and loaning it out at 3% or 3.5% is a considerable gain to the city over the life of that loan, the 7-year life of that loan. Now, if we're going to ask you to commit to loaning more money to the project, then we're still working on the details of where that money would come from, because it's likely that there's not enough room in the fund balance to do that also. We've pretty much tapped out the fund balance in terms of what we can afford to take out of the fund balance. So that would probably entail a borrowing, which then we'd have debt to service. And so then the question is, how do we service that debt? And we're working through those scenarios right now. Like I said, we'll come to you with a concrete proposal on that.
Do you think at some point we could know what some of the things are that we want in it? We've had no idea what you've cut, what's in.
Well, I can generalize simply by saying they generally fall in two categories, okay? The biggest by far is theater equipment. In other words, you've got an empty stage with no lighting, no rigging, no sound system.
So that's what you've cut out, lighting,
Rigging and sound, right. So you've got a blank canvas in terms of a stage at this moment. So the thing that and this is an item that's taking a lot of time and effort because we're not experts on this subject, and we're talking in foreign, as far as I speak for myself, we're talking foreign language here when we start talking to people about how many lights you need and how many dimmer switches you need and line sets, and I don't even know what half this stuff needs. David knows a lot more than I do, but basically when they got through with the value engineering stage, we had a blank stage. So that's by far the biggest number, or is going to be by far the biggest number. The second issue of significance is the Canal Street block, which is the single-story triangle building on Canal Street that had 4 storefronts in there for years. Our intent was to have that be the off-stage amenities, dressing rooms, bathrooms, a function room, et cetera, you know, someplace where you could hold a reception, you know, sort of a multi-purpose room off stage that could be used there. That was our intent. But by the time we got through the value engineering stage, that space was pretty much what you see now is what you get, which isn't usable. So we've had to go back in and say, no, this is the specifications, this is what we think we need to use that space for and how we need it. And so we've asked for estimates as to how much it would cost to get back to where we could get that space to where we think it's usable and valuable.
What about the apartments above?
We have nothing to do with the apartments.
Oh, so that's going to be separate from the colonial money? It's going to be developed by who? BC?
BEDC.
But as a separate item?
Yeah, eventually.
Out of the funds that they're
I mean, to them, it's all one big project at this point in time, but we'll be renting the theater and the Canal Street block from them for 7 years, with the option to buy at the end of 7 years.
But the
apartments-
renovation of the apartments is included in the monies that we're looking for?
Yes.
Yes.
But that, we don't have any, we being the city, don't have any direct input into that. If they decide to put in a certain level of faucet or bathtub or something or other, that's really their expense, not the city's, and we really don't have any input into that because we're not going to rent it or own it. Same with the 4 storefronts. So the apartments in the 4 storefronts are, we really don't have anything to do with, and the costs associated with those.
No.
So if
but
they made value
We wouldn't be
engineer-
able to cut anything out of it then, even though we're looking for more revenue.
Right. And percentage-wise, that's a very small percentage of the
Yeah.
project. The theater is by far
Yeah.
the massive part of the expense.
So just to follow up on Councilor Bear's point, at the end of the day, our $3 million loan and whatever else we put into it that we could turn into ownership is getting the lion's share of the construction budget. So if you think in 7 years, we could convert that dollar amount into owning the theater, a whole lot more of the construction budget goes into the theater part than goes into the apartments and the storefronts.
Now, so if we end up with a $16 million project here, probably at least 13 million of that, you could say is the theater.
So long range, we're leveraging millions of dollars with a relatively, percentage-wise, small investment.
And that's largely because of these federal tax credits.
Yeah.
And between the new markets and the historic tax credits, you're talking $6-7 million right there. It's, in effect, free money as far as the city is concerned, long-term. We're not paying anything for it. Any other questions at this point? Okay, so representatives of VEDC will be here next time. Jack Dugan will be here. If you have any detailed questions about the so-called funding stack and how that's working and coming together, he'll be able to answer those questions for you. And we'll go from there. Okay, committee reports. We had a committee meeting tonight? Yes, Councilor Doyle.
Yep. We met, the Government Operations and Ordinances Committee met, and we looked over the newest revision of the council rules of procedure. We are not, well, we're not going to really do any action on it as far as the council is concerned, because it's 17, 18 pages that everybody needs to really read and make sure they understand and they have any questions before we try to do any votes on it. So we're looking at the 28th for it to be on the agenda for us to discuss it at that time. We've added the electronic attendance, electronic participation down here is one of the rules. And then there was another, and I never can get it straight, I can't explain it. There was another point there with the abstention, the rules on abstention, whether that was to vote or not to vote.
Is this the
if that would
Councilor
be-
Balance Amendment?
We're not laying names. We're just going to discuss
We're
it.
going to leave names out of it.
Yes. But this is whether an abstention would count as a vote or not, and that is, although our attorney, I guess, said that it won't, but there are rules, and we can make our own rules in that respect. So we can say it is, or we can say it isn't. It's something we need to discuss and decide if that's what we want to include it or not. I did mention it at the meeting, and I'm going to mention it here as well, because this is something that you, as the mayor, needs to really consider. And that's under Duties and Privileges of Counselor, Rule 6, because we're all guilty of this.
Oh, boy.
Comment and debate shall be confined to the subject matter of the question. And from what my esteemed right-hand man here said, it's basically interpreted that if we're discussing X about Y, we're not going to discuss AA with Z under the same term, same category. So if we're discussing, let's say, for instance, Mr. Anderson is bringing up something with the sewers on, let's just say, Highland Ave, we can't throw out there, well, let's discuss Main Street paving, because that's not what he's there to present, right?
If it's an agenda item and there's a specific topic, that would be the intent of staying on topic.
So we're all guilty of it, but what I was also informed is that what we need to do is basically it's point of order, and then it's your call as to whether to accept the point of order or not.
Thanks.
Just putting it out there, This is why, you know,
we need
this
to
is why this is my committee. So
All right,
there
so
we
are
go.
you going to be expecting a vote on the 28th, or is this,
I would like to get that far, or I'm
so
sure
we
that
really
Mary...
need to do our homework prior to the 28th?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, it's all highlighted, what's there, what's been changed, what's either added or taken out.
So we're going to get new
We
copies
will get
distributed?
the changes from tonight, we will get the highlighted changes and a strike version, so you can see what was there, what's been changed. We could probably turn that around and get it out tomorrow in your mailboxes, and that'll give you almost 2 weeks of
How about
time.
electronically?
Or electronically, yep.
Yep.
Almost 2 weeks of time to review it, but the intent is to put it on the agenda for the 28th.
I know Mary would like to get this stuff done before we keep adding and subtracting and give us any more time to change things, because every time we change things, it's a big deal.
Just comment, our good clerk has done really a yeoman's job in putting this together.
Well,
So thank you, Mary.
If you notice this too, this was started in 2008.
She's had a
Kinda
long
like the
time.
master plan.
2015, okay. Oh, that was the previous revisions. Okay. So we're only 2 years into it. And we'd like to get it before we get to 3.
Okay.
And that's it.
Councilor Lippman, do you have a comment?
I have something on Finance Committee I'd like to...
Oh, I'm sorry, okay.
One other thing, we had the dog issue, the dog licenses, the electric fencing. We are going to be discussing that. We would like to discuss that on 8/28 as well, like at 6 o'clock, have another committee meeting regarding it.
So we'll
All right, so Counselor Doyle moves to schedule a meeting of government operations and ordinances for 6 o'clock on the 28th to discuss item, the hell is that,
C5,
5?
it just keeps going, yeah.
C5?
Yeah.
Concerns regarding City Code Chapter 113, animals, that as it pertains to restraint of dogs to an owner's property.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, if
Is there
we
a
could.
second to that motion?
Mhm.
Did you say,
Yes.
Counselor Bear seconds the motion. Any discussion? All's in favor of scheduling that meeting, please raise a hand. With 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Anything else on your?
Nope, not
Okay.
unless...
Finance Committee, Counselor Lippman.
Yes, under 14A little 2 is the conversion of the streetlights to LED. I think we've completed that project sufficiently where any remaining items on it could be reported by the manager. We could drop this from the agenda, so that's what I propose.
All right, Counselor Lippman moves under Finance Committee agenda to remove item A2, conversion of streetlights to LED. Seconded by Counselor Hamel. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries, and that is struck as completed. Any other committee business tonight? Liaison reports. Anyone tonight? Okay, citizens request a comment on current agenda items. Is there anyone with us tonight who wishes to address the council on any matter that is on tonight's agenda? Nope. Okay, we are on to item 17, which is the city manager's report. Mr. Myers.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So you have 2 reports submitted in writing for the meeting tonight. I'm going to be very quick because I know you still have quite an agenda ahead of you. Starting on page 41, the unemployment rates for Laconia, the county, and the state are all in the roughly 2.5% range. So again, very low unemployment, and I think we're seeing that in a lot of our seasonal businesses having challenges finding staff. On page 42, we've got one of the components of our tax cap calculation, the Consumer Price Index Urban. We're halfway through the year. The June number for inflation came in at 1.6%, so halfway through the year, we've annualized at 2.2%. We know the Fed has given some indications that they see inflation even slowing a touch from where we are to a 2% range or a little bit under, so halfway through, we're at 2.2, and we'll stay tuned. On the top of page 43, is, again, the construction value, net gain and new construction value from building permits. That runs on the assessing year beginning April 1, running through March 31. You can see that we're a little over $11 million in value on that year-to-date, again, April 1 to now. 2 years ago, we were at 13.6, so a little bit below the 2-year level, but almost $4 million ahead of where we were 1 year ago at this time, and we were at 7.3, so certainly heading in the right direction. We continue to be busy in police and fire. You can see those calls and those statistics on page 43 and page 44. I'll bring you down to the bottom of page 44 to the two items, the two lower boxes. Property tax collection, we've got the July warrant collected. Property taxes were due on July 5th. And you can see in terms of dollars and all the way over to the right, percentage collected. We're at the highest percentage collected over the last 6 or 7 years. So again, I think that's showing strength in the economy, and more people have the ability to be paying on time. Motor vehicle registration at the bottom, again, we have increased the amount that we are estimating for revenue this year. Part of that was due just to growth in motor vehicle registrations. Part of it, you will recall, is that we added the additional $3.50 towards the registration per vehicle. So we're up about 20,000 over July of the prior year. Of that $196,000 figure, about 8,000 or a little bit less is attributable to that $5, and that is subtracted out and for accounting purposes is held in a separate special revenue account, and that's used for transportation-related costs, so road, sidewalks, those types of things. So that kind of gets taken off the top, but again, the overall number is where we projected.
Councilor,
Just a coincident, 14 and 18 number are exactly the same. Is that just coincidence, or we need to double check a number?
We will double check it, but right now I'm going with coincidence. But we will report out our findings tomorrow to you.
Thank you.
Electronically. Page 45 is the update of the fire overtime statistics. Happy to follow up on questions there. Impact fees on the bottom of page 46. Again, we've started a new fiscal year, so you can see the balances that are there. We have revenue to date of about $1,900 came in July. We do have a couple of transfer requests, which are reflected in the column there that you'll be taking up later on this evening, and then that would leave the balances after the transfer request. On page 47, any of the trust balances, the expendable trusts, or the TIF balances all include either new money that rolled into the TIF, in that case right after the first of the year when the budget was adopted, or the adjustments that we've made when we transferred money out of the leave account, the winter maintenance account, and we added money into the non-cap account. So all those are current reflections with actions the council took either in adopting the budget or in conjunction with closing out the year end. Yeah, in the Weirs TIF, the money rolled in, and the first $50,000 payment of the 3 payments that we had due to Eversource for the overage there is backed out, so that's why that's showing as a negative. And I will stop there, and I'm happy to answer any questions anyone may have this evening.
questions or comments for the manager? Councilor Lippman.
I have two that come from requests of people in the community. One is, as we recall, a meeting or so ago, we had the Pleasant Street School was awarded School of the Year, and one of the ideas which I think makes a lot of sense is that is to post some signage coming into the various parts of the city, laying claim to that distinction. You know, we have a lot of things on websites that don't say great things about schools sometimes, and to be able to promote that, you know, if you go into other communities, you know, if they have an Olympian or something like that, they're noting something of distinction. And I think, you know, we talk about upgrading the entry points to the city. I think this would be something for us to support as a council.
Okay, we can work on that and get back to you.
And the second one is a letter I received with respect to asking us to, in effect, take a look at our noise and fireworks policies. This is not a concern about, you know, the 4th of July and events that we're sponsoring. It's sort of use of fireworks beyond the typical times and late at night, that disturbing the peace, if you will. And would like to suggest that if city manager could take a look at that and where we might propose that would be helpful.
We can do some research and bring you a barrel of wide-ranging suggestions.
All right.
We have the noise already from the...
Yeah, we do, but that's for outside loudspeakers, not fireworks.
Oh, we must stick to the subject.
Any other questions or comments? Counselor Hamel?
Yeah, just a couple. Where they're working on lower part of Winter Street now, and the wires that are in the pavement for the traffic control of the intersection on Winter Street has been torn out. And also, I don't know if it'll be next year or the year after, what they're going to be doing, hopefully, Union Avenue from Court Street to Guilford Ave, where probably end up ripping the ones out, controlling those there. I'd like to suggest to have the TIF committee look into putting a camera control at that intersection like we did at Court, Oak, and Guilford Avenue.
I'm
Instead
sorry,
of
what intersection? I missed that.
the busy corner intersection.
Okay.
They're doing construction, and the triggering devices have been ripped out of the ground.
Okay.
And so they either got to, obviously, they got to replace them, or we could put a camera up there. And they're reasonably, they're a reasonable cost, because the one we did here, it was cheaper to put the camera than dig up the road and put the underground tripping devices. So
Easy to work on, too.
yeah, yeah. I
Well, if
mean,
we're going to replace them, we might as well do it.
well, I would think a camera would work. I mean, it seems like the ones we have now are working pretty well at the different intersections and reliable. So, you
Unless
know,
you're on a motorcycle.
I haven't had a lot of trouble. Actually, the one I have trouble with is out on Elm and
Elm
Parade
and
Road.
Parade
there.
Road,
Yep,
yeah,
that
yeah,
one
that
there,
was-
just for some
it's
reason.
impossible.
Yep. But anyway,
Be there for
We
a
can,
month.
we can look at that and work with staff and then bring some ideas to the TIF. I know that's a five-way intersection. I don't know if that factors into it with the cameras versus a traditional four-way, but we will look at it and bring a recommendation forward.
okay. And also, the busy corner again, my favorite lot there is the vegetation has grown out onto the sidewalk and is about 6 foot high again, so maybe another contact with whoever.
I will reach out to them again.
Okay. And I had the pleasure of going to the city barbecue that the city put on. It was, the food was very good. Unfortunately, it was very lightly attended. Probably 2/3 of the employees did not show up for whatever reason. That was their decision. So I guess what I'm wondering is, I mean, we've had this happen before at the Christmas dinner. We've had it happen here. So I'm wondering if the city ought to, not saying to do it tonight or whenever, but reconsider whether we do it or not. We go through a lot of time to set it up, expense of buying the food, and then if they don't show up because of whatever reason they feel like, we end up having to give the food away or whatever. So we ought to consider if 2/3 aren't going to show up, then we shouldn't have it. So it's just something I'm bringing up tonight for discussion at some point.
I can share some information if you'd like while you brought it up. We do send out sign-up sheets to various departments, so we know how many are signed up from department, and we get a good sense of that. So we then buy the food based on the number of sign-ups. We do have our board and commission volunteers come, and I think it's a great opportunity for them to come and get some recognition for what they do. I can tell you firsthand, because we dropped off the extra uncooked food, Kevin Dunleavy and I did, and we called the Boys and Girls Club ahead of time. There were probably 40 hot dogs, 30-something burgers that were uncooked, a couple bags of chips, and a couple of bottles of condiments, mustard, ketchup type of thing. In terms of dollars, it wasn't like we bought for 200 people and only 100 showed up and we had a large waste of food. We always want to, pad it a little bit so we don't run out, but there was not a significant amount of uncooked food, and it did go to a good home. And I think if we saw the numbers from, of people show up who hadn't signed up, then we certainly have the sheet by department. We can go back and say, hey, you got to make sure your folks sign-up. So certainly can take whatever guidance the council does, but we do a pretty good sign-up, and I can assure you that the dollar amount of what was left over was not significant, and it went to a good place in the Boys and Girls Club, who serve a lot of kids.
Okay. That's it.
Yeah, one event a year. One event.
Counselor Bear?
Well, I mean,
Did
maybe
you
we
have
could
something to
have
add?
one big event. Instead of two, we have a Christmas and we have this something. Maybe we could just have one event.
We're open to any ideas and guidance the council would like to provide on that.
Anyone else? Okay, let's move on to new business then. Thank you, councilors. All right, calling your attention to page 48. The first item of new business is a request for a building permit on, I hate to call it this, but a private road at 38 Eastman Shore Road North, the aforementioned road we talked about earlier tonight. The staff report is on page 48. As I'm sure you know, well, let me just ask if there are any questions or comments before we get to making a motion here. This is really a formality. I think the city needs to approve this because it's not a public street. So we need to approve a building permit. Everybody understand that? All right, a motion be in order to approve a building permit for 38 Eastman Shore Road North as requested, contingent upon receiving all permits required by the city. Moved by Councilor Lippman, seconded by Councilor Doyle. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Next up is the same issue, different address, 190 Eastman Shore Road North. That is on page 50. Motion be in order to approve the building permit for 190 Eastman Shore Road North as requested, contingent upon receiving all permits requested by the city. Councilor Doyle makes that motion. Councilor Bounds seconds that motion. Any discussion? All those in favor, please raise a hand. I have 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries. Thank you. Next up is a request to approve traffic signal maintenance agreement between the city and the New Hampshire Department of Transportation for the pedestrian rectangular rapid flashing beacon system to be placed on Endicott Street North at the intersection of Lakeside Avenue. That's on page 52 of your packet. The background on that, as well as a copy of the contract, and basically, if I read this correctly, the state's going to put those 2 flashing lights up on either side of Lakeside Avenue leading across Endicott Street North, much like the exact same setup we have at the Messer Street Bridge or at the corner of Opeachy Street there at the corner where that tragic accident was, and also on Highland Street leading to the hospital parking lot. So we have 2 of these. And as I understand it, the situation is the state's going to put them in at their expense, and we agree to maintain them once they're in. Is that pretty well summarized?
It is, and we've indicated that we've had minimal to no maintenance on the other ones in the first handful of years, so we don't expect this to be anything
So
significant.
any questions or comments before we get to making a motion here? All right, a motion be in order to approve the traffic signal maintenance agreement between the City of Laconia and the New Hampshire Department of Transportation for the pedestrian rectangular rapid flashing beacon system to be placed on Endicott Street North at the intersection with Lakeside Avenue, and authorize the city manager to sign the agreement on behalf of the city. Moved by Councilor Doyle, seconded by Councilor Bolduc. Any discussion? All those in favor of authorizing that signature, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. All right, the next one is on page 56. And this is a request to allow snowmobiles to use the sidewalk across the Weirs Beach bridges, plural, meaning the bridge over the channel and the bridge which you don't really realize you're on that goes over the railroad tracks next to the channel. All right. And I'm gonna turn, I don't really understand what the background on this is, so I'm gonna ask the city manager to brief us on this one, please.
I will do that, Mr. Mayor, and I've got a Public Works Director to back me up, but it's, this was a request that came in to order to connect to the snowmobile trails that occur along the tracks and down along the boardwalk area and stuff in the winter where we don't maintain. We do not currently allow or authorize snowmobiles to be going over the city sidewalks. The request came in for us to not...
From whom?
David Weeks.
An individual?
Correct.
On behalf of a snowmobile club or just...
No, just an individual himself.
So request to have the city not clear the snow off the sidewalk so that there would be some continuity of trail available to the snowmobiles.
We talking both sides of the street or one side of the street?
There's only one sidewalks here.
Side.
Sidewalks only is on the
Lake
lakeside.
Okay, yep.
So this would be a request to change what we're doing right now. We do not allow the snowmobiles for a number of reasons that are listed there. We're not recommending the change, but because it was requested and it was asked to go to the legislative body, it was brought to you for consideration. But staff request for maintenance reasons, for safety reasons, for pedestrian use in the winter, we would not be recommending that we change our current policy as it stands, which does not allow for snowmobiles on the sidewalk.
Counselor Hamel.
Now, I could be all wrong on this, but that's Route 3. That bridge belongs to the state, I believe. They're replacing the part over the railroad track. So I would think that why are we voting on something that the state owns? I don't think we plow that all winter long anyway.
We started plowing it last year.
Oh, great.
And the way the rules are, is we are responsible for maintenance of the sidewalks along the state routes. So that we therefore have control over what happens with the sidewalks.
Gotcha.
That's interesting, because I had a call this afternoon on this subject from a snowmobile advocate, not Mr. Weeks, who informed me, and I have no way of, I mean, I know this gentleman and can speak for for him from a reputation standpoint, but I have no personal knowledge of this whatever other than repeating what he said. And now what was just added by Mr. Anderson kind of falls in place with what he was saying. But what he told me was that the state has been maintaining the sidewalk over that bridge as a snowmobile trail for years.
They have.
And it stopped last year. And so that would explain if suddenly the city took over maintenance for it and didn't maintain it for snowmobiles, which he said the state has been doing for a long time. And his argument for continuing the practice was that, and I don't pretend to understand this because I don't, certainly not an expert on the geography involved, but apparently the reason for it was he said something about there's a right-of-way that ends somewhere in the vicinity of the fire station, like a power easement or something or other, that has been maintained as a snowmobile trail, and that the only way to get from that easement, say you live in Guilford, the only way to get from that easement, which I honestly don't know where it is, to get from there to the railroad tracks is to go over the bridge at that location, and that's why they wanted it maintained, so that people coming from Weirs Boulevard and from Guilford and from Endicott Street East on a snowmobile can access the railroad track trail by going over the bridge there. So that was the where that easement is, I don't have any idea, but he said there's some sort of easement there that allows people to get that far, but then they can't make the connection to the main trail on the railroad tracks without going over the bridge. And that's why DOT for years, he said, maintained the sidewalk as a snowmobile trail.
Well, now, can snowmobiles go on the pavement? I don't snowmobile, they can't.
Only if the city council approves the authorization because they're within the city limits.
So could it be a limited just over that bridge, or is it an all or nothing?
You could limit it to the bridge. It would still be illegal unless we posted it basically saying that the city council, fancy words, whatever, has authorized snowmobiles to cross the sidewalk at this point, and only be for that section of the sidewalk.
What sidewalk are we
There's
talking
a
about?
sidewalk on the edge of the bridge.
We're talking about the sidewalk on the bridge? There's not
Yes.
some other bridge somewhere?
No, just that one.
That's the
I'm
only
sorry.
one?
That's the one, yes.
Yes.
The sidewalk that runs along the edge of the bridge.
Okay.
That people are now walking on, because
And
there's a
you
number
s-
of walkers.
And you say that the state has been maintaining that
Well,
sidewalk?
as I understood it, by maintaining, he meant that they that they have been using a wing plow to plow snow up on the sidewalk so that there would always be a snow base on the sidewalk.
All right.
And that practice stopped last year.
And we started plowing the sidewalk last
Correct.
year?
We did.
Okay.
And
Why?
that is a request of pedestrians who
Yeah.
are walking and have a safe passage. And DOT does not maintain sidewalks anywhere, even though they might be state sidewalks and they're built. There's some down on 11A, on Guilford Ave, that you had requests from Guilford, while we've got our crews in the area, could we go down, and the state, may build the sidewalks, but they don't plow them anywhere.
So put another way, it appears the state was plowing snow up on the sidewalk and we just left it there.
Correct.
Until last year. And then last year, we started removing it.
Okay.
At the request
Now
of
I
pedestrians.
Oh, now I understand. I get it now. I thought there were two bridges. I'm going like, what? I
Well,
don't know
there
if
are,
two
but-
Well,
bridges.
There are,
technically,
but
it's
they're-
two
but they're
bridges, but you don't
contiguous.
know you're really on
Yeah.
the second bridge. Now, how how would a snowmobile get from the fire station to the bridge?
On the sidewalk.
On the sidewalk?
On the sidewalk. That's the issue at this point. They
So
are
historically, they used the sidewalk all the way down.
Correct. And state law says they can't unless authorized by the local municipality.
Okay.
But at the same point, people out there that walk want to use the sidewalks too, otherwise they're forced into the road.
Why did we start plowing the sidewalk again?
People could walk.
Was it pedestrians?
Pedestrian request.
Okay.
What?
So we have a dilemma here, pedestrians or snowmobiles?
That's why I was wondering if the
Can't do
snowmobiles
both.
could do the, I
How
mean,
much-
well, how much
damage?
how much snowmobile traffic is out there? Do you know? Either?
Yeah, it is.
Because I know at my end it's not, so.
Railroad tracks is a main route,
Yeah, I know that's the north-south corridor, isn't it? Yeah.
goes up into Parade Road and other main routes up there.
And I do know in areas of Route 11 down in New Durham and Farmington where they do have crossings over Route 11, they do significant.
They do.
Impact.
Yeah, I was
It's
going to
not-
bring that up. Those cleats under there, if you
Right,
let
it's
them go on
not
the
as if
road.
they can just do a quick over and it doesn't. It actually creates some rutting and dipping and stuff with,
Well, that's what I'm concerned about. We've done all that road work over there and sidewalks. Is that going to damage the sidewalks?
Well, if they got snow on it, no.
Well, and I'm not advocating, I'm just saying that it appears this has been going on for years, so this is not something new. It's already been done for a
Now that
long time.
we've done the street over and stuff.
I'm sorry?
They're going to go down the new street, right, that we have there? At the Weirs? Once they go over the bridge, where do they go?
I assume they go down through Endicott Park and pick up the railroad tracks in Endicott Park. Endicott Rock Park.
So they don't use it to go to...
They probably go to the driveway there and then go down into the park and pick up the railroad tracks in the park.
It's a little bit more complicated because what we had to do in the past, because of where they were driving, is we took down a section of the gate along Lakeside Avenue. So the ones who didn't know where they were going could get back onto the tracks and proceed down it versus going down our sidewalks.
So they didn't go in through the driveway, they went in through a gate down further down.
Yeah, it was, I want to say it's about two-thirds of the way down to that first bump out. We would historically take a section of fence down.
So it's kind of like a pigtail on a highway.
Yeah.
Propose that we table this for tonight because it seems like there's a number of other considerations to
Good
be
idea.
had here.
Second that.
Because I think we could speculate for another 20 minutes here what would be the right solution.
It's a tough one.
Is there a committee that could be put into and have them look at it?
Not ours.
Counselor Bolduc is asking if there's a committee we could assign this to.
Public Works.
Public Works?
Safety? Is there a safety committee?
Yeah. But would that be a safety issue?
I would think so.
That's me.
Did I understand there was a motion to table?
Yes.
Okay, I
We
second
can't
that motion.
discuss it.
I second that motion. Not debatable, you need
What's
to
the-
vote.
Right. Motion to table.
All right, are we going to refer this to a committee? That's the question.
I would think so.
Or continue to handle it as a committee of the whole, in effect?
Why don't we table it, have some discussions offline with the administration and then decide whether it makes sense to bring it to a committee or not.
Well, and I think we need some input also from the interest groups as well, so we have a better understanding of how the snowmobile trail in that part of the city works.
Well, that's why I think
practically.
a committee would look into that, I would think, but that's fine.
Point of order.
I'm sorry?
Point of order. I think a motion to table. I think a motion to table means that all discussion ends,
Right.
and you just have to vote.
You're technically correct.
Yeah,
You
so
are right.
so I just call that point of order and move the question.
So do you move to table to a definite date, or just keep it under unfinished business?
We'll move to table till the next meeting.
God, we got a
Okay,
lot going
Counselor
on next
Counselor Lippman moves to table this issue until the next meeting, where it would come up under unfinished business. Is there a second to that motion?
Second.
Counselor Bounce seconds that motion. We're going to vote right away on that. All those in favor of tabling, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries, and this issue is tabled to our next meeting, where it will appear under unfinished business. Okay, item 18 is on page 57 of your packet. This is a request from the Colonia Police Department to make Lakeside Avenue in the vicinity of the building with the Where's the Beef restaurant a no parking area. And there is a staff report on page 57 and a partial map on the next page, or photograph of the area. And so it looks like we're simply talking about the portion of Lakeside Avenue that runs parallel to the actual building. So the area would start at the front of the Where's the Beef and go down the side of that building to the Pair of Dice Tattoo Parlor and stop. Everybody have a general picture of what we're talking about there? So basically, along the length of that building, there would be no parking allowed along the street, where that building is right up against the road there.
Makes sense to me.
Councilor Lippman?
Just, why did the recommendation come?
I believe it came from the police that it had been posted there one time, but during construction, things came down, and it was never formally authorized as a no parking. It probably just happened at some point, so this is cleaning up and housekeeping and taking a formal vote to restore it that way officially.
I'll make that motion.
All right, Councilor Lippman moves to approve a no parking zone on the east side of Lakeside Avenue from the south end of the building at 329 through 347 to the intersection of Lakeside Avenue with Centenary Avenue, seconded by Councilor Bolduc. Any discussion? All those in favor of that proposal, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. Okay, we're back to Eastman Road again. Eastman Road instead of Eastman Shore Road at this time, page 59 in your packet. And this is a request to lower the speed limit on Eastman Road, which I'm sure everyone is aware of, but I'll say for the public's sake, starts at Meredith Center Road and runs down to the lake, and where it dead ends into Eastman Shore Roads, north and south. And the speed limit apparently there now is 35 miles an hour, and there's a request to change that to 25 miles an hour. Any questions or comments before we get to making motions? I think everyone who's ever driven on that road knows how steep it is, and there's a big S-curve in the middle of it as well. Okay. So a motion be in order to reduce the speed limit on Eastman Road from 35 miles an hour to 25 miles an hour as requested. Councilor Doyle makes that motion. Councilor Bolduc seconds it. Any discussion? All those in favor of that proposal, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, motion carries. Okay, we're on to item 18, and that is on page 60 of your packet, and this is a request to approve new ambulance rates to be effective on August 15th. And for that background, I will recognize the city manager.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I have Chief Erickson here to bail me out if needed tonight as well. But the long and short of it is, in conjunction with our contract renewal with Lakes Region Healthcare, LRG Healthcare, we've looked at a number of options for helping this get to the hospital's goal of being more of a break-even scenario. That's kind of where the board and the administration is looking at right now. So we're looking at adjusting the rates upward, which have not been increased since 2008. We're also looking at our collection process and the percentage fee for collection that's going on there as well, and a couple other smaller things in hopes of putting together a new contract that'll be coming to the council in the coming weeks that has less of a financial impact on the hospital, and it will have some checks and balances that as these new rates and a couple of other changes that are implemented go into effect, that we can start tracking them after a few months to see if the desired outcome is materializing or not as far as the revenues for them. So that's the long and short of it, but rates have not been increased since 2008, and this will not impact any contractual arrangements that the hospital currently has with some health insurance providers, nor would it have a huge, would have any impact on any federally paid-for ambulance transport. So either through Medicaid or Medicare, those rates are set and have the maximum levels. So we're not saying that this truly would be a huge increase in revenue on 100% of ambulance transports, but it would be a component.
So the rate might be $1,600, but if the hospital has an arrangement to pay $1,000, then they're
usual
going
and
to continue to pay
customary,
$1,000. Well, can you explain what's on page 62?
Page 62 breaks down what the rate is by different levels of service and level of transport for advanced life support, for basic life support, specialty transport, so there's different classifications.
These are the current rates?
Those are the, yes, the price effective on the top right, price effective 10/1/2008. So those are the current rates as of 2008 for the various components versus the proposed rates that are before you on page 61.
So a BLS emergency transport is going from $500 to $949.
Yes,
That's how you read that?
yes.
And a ALS2 emergency transport is going from $875 to $1,600. So we're basically doubling the rates.
Yes, and again, some of these things probably should have been looked at on a schedule so that we stayed current and did updates every other year type of thing. But,
So this is mostly going to affect private pay?
or, yeah, private pay, or, so either private pay insurance or private pay with someone with no insurance.
Counselor Bolduc.
Yes, I know if we ought to extend the time for a few minutes, or
10:30?
10:30.
Counselor Bolduc moves to extend our meeting time tonight to 10:30. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Counselor Bounds. All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you, Counselor. Okay, any comments, questions before we get to making motions here? So we're basically doubling the rates, which haven't been touched since 2008. That's really what it amounts to.
And the basis for those rates, as you can see, is a benchmark of local municipal services and private services. So it wasn't just we went and picked numbers to try to make a contract work.
Has a model been developed to estimate how much extra revenue this is expected to develop,
I believe over 60-something% of our transports are federally subsidized in
Chief
one
Erickson?
format.
70% of our transports are federally subsidized. All these increases, they estimate, will only raise about $60,000 in new revenue.
$60,000 on an
$60,000.
annual basis?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
What, can I, a question? What are the ALS1 and BLS and ALS2, what's that mean?
ALS1 would be it wouldn't actually be a paramedic level ambulance call, it would be an advanced level with IVs administered. An ALS2 would be a paramedic level transport. Cardiac arrest would be the simplest explanation of an ALS2.
So is that, is this the cost to bring them to Concord? Or is that all?
No, that's the cost to bring them to anywhere. The change would be the mileage.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if they were going to Concord, it would be at,
This price plus mileage?
Right.
Okay. And the mileage is also going up?
Correct.
But that's only going up $3, right?
Yes.
Per mile? Yeah.
they're bringing it all up to pretty much the area average. They will be the highest in
So
the
it's
area.
the rate plus so much a mile?
Correct. And the average transport in Laconia is only 3 miles, so the mileage doesn't make a big impact unless we were going to Concord or Dartmouth.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, other questions for the chief while we've got him up here? Thank you. Okay, are we ready to consider this? A motion be in order to approve the rate increase which supports the ambulance agreement between LRG Healthcare and the City of Laconia as presented. Someone make that motion?
So move.
Moved by Counselor Hamel, seconded by Counselor Bolduc. Discussion. Okay, all those in favor of adopting this new rate schedule, raise a hand, please. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Okay, we're on to Highway Block Grant, page 63. Well, this is to officially accept the unanticipated revenue of $294,633 and change. I think we've talked about this at previous meetings. Everybody understand what this is about? So we need to adopt the resolution, which is on page 65, and schedule a public hearing to be able to accept that additional revenue, right? So the first motion, again, with the resolution itself, is number 22, and it's on page 65. The first motion would be in order, would be to move to waive the reading of Resolution 22 in its entirety and to read by title only.
So moved.
Moved by Counselor Hamel, seconded by Counselor Bear. Any discussion? All those in favor of waiving the entire reading, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Thank you. Next up would be a first reading of Resolution 22 relative to authorizing a supplemental appropriation for the State of New Hampshire Highway Block Grant Funds of $294,633.74 per the adoption of Senate Bill 38. Moved by Counselor Bear, seconded by Counselor Hamel. Any discussion?
That number is what we expected it to be, was a little higher.
It's a little higher. I was conservative, not knowing the exact formula in the miles of road, so I think we budgeted 275 or 285,000, so we're a few thousand higher than budget.
All those in favor of adopting Resolution 22 on first reading, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. And lastly, on this issue, we need to move to schedule a public hearing on Resolution 22nd for the regular City Council meeting on August 28, 2017. By Counselor Bear, seconded by Counselor Bolduc. Any discussion? All those in favor of scheduling that public hearing, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries as well. Thank you. Okay, we're on to page 66. And this is with regard to a transfer of impact fees. To move to transfer $16,000 from impact fee roads to DPW street repairs, and to transfer $5,000, from impact fees library to equipment. You want to explain what the equipment is?
Yes, for a new server in both of these items, at the library, and both of these items were discussed during the adoption of the budget, that some small cuts were made with the intention of transferring these funds out once the new fiscal year started.
Yep.
All right. Okay, so any questions before we get to making motions? We have 2 motions to get through here. All right, first motion in order would be to transfer $16,000 from account 50-301-001-0005 impact fees roads to account 01-497-500-0013 DPW street repairs. Counselor Hamel makes that motion. Counselor Bolduc seconds it. Any discussion of that transfer? All those in favor, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that motion carries. Next up, motion would be in order to transfer $5,000 from account 50-301-001-0006 impact fees library to account 01-481-401-0000 equipment, library equipment. Moved by Counselor Bolduc, seconded by Counselor Bear. Any discussion? All those in favor of that transfer, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative, and that motion is approved as well. Okay, we have 2 items of unfinished business with regard to the items we had public hearing on tonight, public hearings on tonight. The first is Resolution 21, which is on page 68. And that would be to adopt on second reading Resolution 20, relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $20,000 for mobile data terminal MDT equipment for the police department in the amount of $20,000.
I think you got these confused. 21 is for 2,700, if I'm right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did I say 21?
You did.
It's 20.
It's 20.
And I said 21?
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. So the first motion would be, let me start over, would be a second reading of Resolution 20, relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $20,000 for mobile data terminal equipment for the police department in the amount of $20,000. Moved by Counselor Bolduc, seconded by Counselor Bear. Any discussion? All those in favor of that authorization, please raise a hand. 6 votes in the affirmative, that carries. Thank you. Next up is second reading of Resolution 21, which is on page 68, and that is relative to authorizing the city manager to accept and expend a grant on behalf of the city in the amount of $2,700 for e-ticket equipment for the police department. Someone make that motion. Counselor Bear makes that motion, seconded by Counselor Bolduc. Any discussion? All those in favor of adopting Resolution 21 on second reading, please raise a hand. We have 6 votes in the affirmative. That motion carries as well. Okay, council comments. Any council comments tonight? No? Okay, so we have, as was mentioned, it seems like 3 days ago, we have need for a non-public session tonight under RSA 91A with regard to item E, is that correct?
D, I think, well,
E?
Mr. Mayor.
D or E?
D.
D, consideration of the acquisition, sale, or lease of real or personal property which, if discussed in public, would likely benefit a party or parties whose interests are adverse to those of the general community. Someone please make a motion to go into non-public session for item D. Counselor Bolduc, seconded by Counselor Bear. I'd ask the clerk please call the roll on this motion.
Yes.
Counselor Bowen?
Yes.
Counselor Whitman?
Yes.
Counselor Bear?
Yes.